So, do you remember the first time we met?
I don't.
Okay. It was at it was at that kids Molid. You remember that at U Chicago?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that like some sort of Unitarian church by the campus. I do remember that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It must have been like 3 years ago or something. So I just remember and I think we were in the because it was like for the kids, right? Our kids went off in these little stations and they did like posters and did nasheeds,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah.
And I remember we were like at the end, we were there like had food and like snacks.
Hmm.
And I remember we are just chanting. I was like, "Who's this guy?" And like you because you carry a cane around, you got like a blazer and you're like a vest and a tie. And I was dressed kind of like how I am now. I'm like, we're both dads. Our kids are there, and we're just kind of
Hmm.
talking. And then that's kind of that was the first time. And I remember, and you said, Aren't you the guy from the podcast?" I remember that.
I
Um,
recognized your voice. That's what it was.
because we weren't on YouTube then. Yeah, we
No.
weren't on YouTube. So back then I was getting recognized by my voice.
Yeah.
That was always a trip whenever I'd be in some random location and somebody would come up to me and like ask, like, hey, are you the host of the Mad Mumlukes? So no, but first of all, and then I remember we connected later on social media. We met a few times while you're in Chicago, and now you're seems like with this Hamza the Historian YouTube channel, I'm just like, dude, I was sleeping on you, man. It was like I knew you on this kind of like casual level, and I was like, yo, this dude, like, the dude's a beast. I'm not. I know we should be tooting each other's tooting your horn right in front of your face, but yeah, but like but it's interesting because you post a lot about your past, right? So Hamza used to be Cody with dreadlocks,
That's
right,
right.
and a power lifter.
I still power
You
lift. I
still
was
power lift, right?
deadlifting 315 today.
Okay,
6 reps.
so yeah, real quick. So I remember you had some injury issues. When did you start powerlifting? Was that like something you did as a kid, or as early as I don't know how early you can start powerlifting, but
So in high school, I was kind of like skater slash emo goth dweeb nerdy
okay,
guy.
yeah,
And but I grew up with a father who was always into bodybuilding. He didn't compete or anything, but it was like his hobby. And so I seen it a lot growing up. And then, I mean, ever since I hit puberty, I've been a little like heavy set. I was later diagnosed with hypothyroidism,
okay,
but I decided like when I was, I don't know, 19 or 20 or something like that, I wanted to like go to the gym, be active, be fit, and lose weight and all of that.
hmm,
And I just kind of like realized I really like living heavy stuff. And I didn't know that I was like as strong as I was. And I kind of just had a natural knack for it. So I just started getting into it and competed and stuff like that. And
and so powerlifting is like that. Is that like what deadlift, squat? What are the lifts that are involved there?
yeah, so like in a competition, first you do a squat,
Okay,
and then after that you do a bench press, and then after that you do the deadlift, and then like they add the weight that you lifted for each lift, and that's called your total.
hmm,
And then whoever has the biggest total in the same age and weight class division, wins, so to
right.
say.
Okay. Now I remember when you had told me that you had hurt your back or something, at some point.
That's why I have the cane. Yeah.
Mm,
I was actually working at a factory, eyeglass factory, makes glasses like what me and you are wearing,
hmm,
and I got injured on the job. So it had nothing to do with the weightlifting, but like, I mean, it took me until now. That happened in 2014. It took me till now to kind of be able to lift the same weights again, and now it's starting to heal a bit better. And I don't walk with a cane as much anymore, but it's been a long road.
I see. Now powerlifting for those who aren't is that like where you're doing the lower like people who because I've actually got back in. Well, I actually was never in the gym. I've always been a yo-yo. I've always been your typical yo-yo dieter, casual, go to the gym every once in a blue moon. I've only really been taking it seriously the last like few months and really the last 80 days because I'm in a program. I hired a coach and everything, and he's got me like he's literally got me what I think is on a bodybuilding type program, right? Where I'm doing a cut, and a lot of it is like high repetition. So I was because like I was telling him the other day, I was like, bro, you got me doing like 3 sets of 15 squats. I mean, like 3 with 15 reps. And he's like, but he's like, but like you with that, you can't like go heavyweight because at rep 10 or 11, your form is you're starting to get fatigued, right?
Yeah.
And then we were talking about like, so a lot of I know people that got into the whole 5x5, the Mark Ripito starting strength program, and they tell me that they're being able to lift all this weight, but when I look at them, they look the same, right? Where and he was like, listen, because starting strength or power or that kind of work is starting strength like powerlifting. Is that what you would do for that, or is that
Kind of. I mean, the thing that I would tell somebody who's new getting into it is do bodybuilding for a while, because you need to build a base.
Okay.
And so, with the high repetition or just kind of the high duration where the muscle's under tension,
right?
Whether you do that through reps or you do really slow reps or pause reps or whatever it is, that kind of builds a muscle base. And then powerlifting, like how you build strength in any kind of lift, is you're going to build the thicker muscle fibers, and you're going to build your nervous system. A lot of what makes you strong is having more nerves that activate the muscles, because the average guy, maybe when he does a lift, he's only actually activating 50% of his muscle fibers. Pro power lifters can activate 90+% of their muscle fibers.
I got you. Okay, cool. Anyways, I don't want to like waste too much time. I know we it's my thing right now, right? And I'm like, it's when you probably understand this, when you get into a fitness routine where, like right now, I'm like, part of the reason I had to make a shake real quick because I was like, I have so many calories left in the day today, and I can't eat them at 10 p.m. or 10 whenever we finish up this show. And I'm like, so it's like that whole thing's always in the back of your head. Like, what am I going to eat? What am I going to eat? Tracking it. Can I have like this? Can I move stuff around? My wife screwed me up today because she brought home Pizza Hut for lunch, right? And so it's like, okay, I can take it's thin crust. I saw some thin crust. I'm like, all right, they measure it out. I'll have some. In general, it's not tempting me, but today it was like I was starving, and it was like really. I had food in my fridge. A minute to microwave, but the Pizza Hut sitting there fresh from Pizza Hut, right? And it's always the game, especially when the spouse doesn't really care. She's just like, yeah, as long as her mentality, as I've said before, is like, as long as it doesn't affect me, you can do whatever you want. You know what I mean? But so tell me this. Going back to, are you a Minnesota guy originally?
Yeah, I was born in Minneapolis.
Okay. So you talked a little bit in high school. You were kind of like a goth, kid. What was were you interested in religion, spirituality, philosophy? What kind of things were you into as a kid?
So like when I was real little, I was raised Lutheran. That's pretty dominant out here in Minnesota because we have a big Scandinavian population. I'm Norwegian and Swedish. And I remember like always being interested in religion and asking all the questions that the Sunday school teachers couldn't answer or didn't like to be asked, And but I remember distinctly as a kid when we'd be like praying in church, sometimes people would like address Jesus directly and pray to Jesus, like this. And I remember switching it in my head as a kid and saying God instead of Jesus. And that was like the fitra that was there and I didn't know, type thing. And when I became a teenager, I became real into philosophy, and I became more like agnostic or atheist. And I got into Bart D. Ehrman. Have you heard of him?
I actually interviewed him on my podcast.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was reading his stuff on the internet, back when it was dial up and,
okay.
What do you call it? DSL.
Yeah.
And, I kind of just lost faith in the Bible as a book.
Because of how he like deconstructed it. Right.
Right. You realize that the manuscript tradition varies widely. Different Christian traditions have totally different books in the Bibles and all the things like that. It makes it really hard to know what's actually from Jesus. If Jesus, I believe, he existed historically, but what did he actually say? Alayhi salam? It's hard to tell from the biblical manuscripts. And so I kind of became maybe like a deist for a while, where I believed in, God, but I wasn't sure about any particular scripture. And I started, slowly becoming more like atheist over time. And, when I discovered Islam, I was pretty much a full atheist.
Okay, and what was when you're an atheist, is it like because I've talked to a couple atheists now, and it seems like you don't meet that many. Some of them are. I think I asked one like I don't know, actually on an episode like, hey, so how do you don't you believe in this effective cause? Like trying to hold build the whole cosmological argument, right? Like did the universe come out of nothing? And he's like, no, it's all random. Like there is no cause and effect really. Um, when you were, would you say you were an atheist in a sense that like Ehrman just kind of, and I think Ehrman identifies as either agnostic or atheist. I'm not really sure. I think more of an agnostic. Um, but do you think it's more like, well, Christianity is the faith you know, and that's what's out there, or did you think about like Hinduism, Sikhism, Judaism, all this other stuff out there? Like, what was I guess to jump from because I think a Christian could look at Ehrman and have his faith deconstructed and may lose his faith. But you said you go to deism, but the jump to atheism seems like like sometimes when you think about it, a person to go that far is almost like an extreme jump, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I started getting into it was called the Church of Satan. Okay.
The Church of Satan. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are they? Is that really what it sounds like?
It's shocking. But I discovered it because at the time I listened to, like different heavy metal artists, and one of them was Marilyn Manson. And I had read his autobiography that he was like made like a type of minister in the Church of Satan. So I got curious about it. It's just an atheist group. They like to use, Satan just to like shock Christians, basically. Mm-hmm. And, they had like some morals and principles. And that's what kind of got me like looking into that stuff. And then I started reading like Nietzsche and different, philosophers that had to do with like the American atheist movement, so to say.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I can't say I was quite sophisticated. I was only a teenager,
Right.
But it kind of just gave me a lot of doubts, right, about the existence of God.
Okay. What about so how'd you come across Islam? Just something just popped in your head watching the news? What was that all about?
So I was never like too serious about high school because I was from Minneapolis, but then like my mom moved us from the Twin Cities out to the small town in Minnesota. And I went to high school in a small town where they didn't have like a lot of different electives to choose from. So I had like nothing that interested me. Okay. So I didn't really do that well in school, but I went to community college right after, and I thrived in college. And I was president of the multicultural club, and I was on the board of another club that was called the Beliefs, Opinions, and Ideas Club.
So real quick, so I remember you saying this one time, and it kind of like blew my mind that you said you weren't a good high school student, and then you ended up at the University of Chicago in a graduate program. But like, do you think it's like so you just were bored, right? Is that more or less? But don't you think that because generally when I look at people who are like end up doing well in like college and in graduate school, they always seem to have had good study habits as a child growing up, right? Read a lot, and they were able to work because you could be interested in something and still like not be like it's still work. You still got to put in the work to consume, to read the material and process it and like write about it. Like how were you able to overcome that, or would you say it was more like once you got interested that stuff just fell into place?
My parents divorced when I was young, and so after school my mom would usually be gone working for like long hours. She would work like 2 or 3 jobs, and I would sit at home. But the one thing I did have was dial-up internet as a kid. Okay. And then later DSL and all that, right? So I spent a lot of time researching whatever my interests were on the internet. And this was back when the internet actually had, like real information.
Yep.
Before social media and all that crazy stuff.
Yeah, yep.
Back when it was just like nerds, on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Right, and, right, yeah.
And I was never like, I never looked at myself as being dumb. I always knew like I'm capable and smart. just I could tell I was smarter than other people. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I could tell I had a knack for these types of things. And whatever I was interested in, I could do research on the internet and find out a lot about it. I would buy books about it and read it. And I had free time after school to pursue those things. I couldn't leave the house because I had to stay home and watch my younger brother. So I couldn't go socialize like a lot of kids would do after school. So I think it kind of, I had this, autodidactic kind of way of learning, right? That I cultivated just like throughout my adolescence, and nobody else really knew about it, I guess.
Okay, so you fast forward to community college, you're involved in these multicultural groups. What happens next?
So I eventually became president of the Multicultural Club.
Okay.
And this is in a small town, so it's not like there's a lot of people of different cultures around, but there were some, and they're part of the club and all this and that. And I realized, through us talking and learning about different cultures in this club, that religion had a huge impact on culture. Fast forward to graduate school, most scholars or academics of religion in the Western tradition would say it's almost impossible to distinguish between religion and culture. They're always so deeply intertwined. And I kind of realized this back when I was in community college. And so I started learning about every major world religion because, I wanted to understand different cultures. And I almost even became like a Sikh because I
what drew you to that? What drew you to that?
I don't really remember because it's so long ago. This was, probably like 12, 13 years ago. But it had like an element of monotheism that was, it's kind of similar to Islamic Tawheed that drew me into it. And, I wasn't that into like Western traditions or Western type religions, so to say, like Judaism and Christianity. I looked at, well, that's just like common in the West. I know those things already. I was like really reading into Hinduism, but I couldn't accept like the creation story, and I couldn't accept, this, and that. And I was reading into Taoism and all these different things, Shintoism, but none of them really convinced me. And, I was atheist and I had to disprove every religion,
Yeah, right.
So I had that attitude, right?
Okay, absolutely.
And I researched them all except for Islam.
Now, did you know about Islam, or was it something that, because I figured some of these religions are kind of foreign. I mean, we live in a post 9/11 world. I mean, you've had to like at least heard of Islam by now.
Yeah, we all witnessed 9/11. And when I was in high school, they had like a world history course that I took, and it briefly like mentioned Islam. Oh yeah, they make Hajj, they pray 5 times a day, that type of thing. So I kind of had this vague idea of it, right? And at the time, I had this channel on YouTube called Cody Languages, which is now Hamza the Linguist.
Okay.
And I was making videos about learning languages because that's what I was into as a hobby. I had learned German, I was studying Chinese, I had learned some French, some Swahili, some Somali, these different languages I was real into. And one of the biggest, I guess you would say, YouTube like language learners or polyglots, his name was Moses McCormick. He was known as Lao Shu. He recently passed away. And he was a Muslim convert at that time. And he was telling me about Islam one time. We had like private conversations. And he's like, I got this Quran in Chinese. And, I just did my interactions with him. I said, wow, this guy is like super nice. Yeah, like good manners, good character. Like, I guess maybe I don't know anything about Islam. And I started thinking in the past, living in the Twin Cities, I lived in an apartment building that had a lot of Somalis, had some Arabs in it. And I remember like playing with them as a kid. And I'm like, they were always so nice to me. Like, maybe I really don't know anything about this religion. Maybe I had it all wrong, is what I was thinking at that point.
Kind of you had somehow subconsciously bought into this media narrative without really real. Exactly. And then you kind of were like, wait a second, that's, sometimes that's like, how often you hear this conversation. It's like, no, we won't consider Islam. Islam's not an option, right? It's just like, it's just that's just too, that's something out there.
That's the white American attitude. Yeah. You're seen as like a race traitor if you convert to Islam,
That's literally like that's the, I remember we did the show Ismail Royer. and he was in a cell with like some like neo-Nazi. And this guy was like chanting, "Race traitor, race traitor." I was like, yeah, I mean, that's certainly a challenge. It comes. I hear it a lot, to be honest. So yeah, I guess long story short, it just made sense to you, and you kind of that piqued your interest.
What you said there gave me all kinds of goosebumps on my arm because the town in Minnesota I was living in is called Hutchinson.
Okay.
The president of the Nazi Party of America lived there when I was there.
Oh yeah.
So this was something I grew up around too. So it was a very real thing. You know, it was a very tangible thing. If I'm presentably Muslim in public there, real violence could happen to me.
Okay. Yikes.
Yeah, but he eventually was ran out of town. But you know, it was.
I mean, but he's got followers. Like, if you're there, you're not there in a vacuum, right? I mean, I feel like the dude was living there for a reason.
So, this guy had a stepdaughter who was like went to high school with me, and I was just hanging out at her house. I had no idea this was like her stepdad.
Okay.
I'm not gonna name names or go into detail, but like, I accidentally seen one of their meetings, and I seen police officers in there. I seen lawyers in there. I seen, prominent people in the community in there. And so it was like one of those things where you felt like they had the power.
Okay, so since you mentioned this, you hear a lot about like what a neo-Nazi is.
This was a town,
yeah,
where the Nazis would have an open public meeting every Wednesday at the Applebee's.
Okay.
I'm not even kidding. I'm not making it up. You could probably Google it.
Yeah. What's the what's the ideology of the Nazi? Real talk. Is it like Aryan supremacy, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant supremacy? And do they want to eliminate others, or do they want to create their own community? Like, what's the modern iteration of the Nazi? Because you think a Nazi like is Hitler, was that the official Nazi party? Was that the original? Are they the OG Nazis? Hitler?
I mean, some of them venerated them in that, venerated the Hitler and, in that way. But like, the thing is it's every like group has its own different thing or different beliefs. Right. Yeah. And to be honest, in my recollection and my personal life experience, they're not like the most philosophical or ideological, really. Some of them are just more like, oh, we just want to separate and have our own country, or, they just have the whole kind of a loose white supremacism. We're better than you. We hate you. And it's like, honestly, a lot of these people, they had like psychological problems is my my kind of view on them. So I think they kind of might try to rationalize that stuff. Maybe it's like a severe insecurity that they're kind of like trying to compensate for or whatever, or, some severe trauma they had as a child. But that's more what it feels like to me.
but they kind of but they actually call themselves Nazis, right?
Yeah, skinheads shave the head. They wearing the camouflage pants with the big boots and all that.
Okay. So it's like the kind of stuff you see in like American History X.
Yeah, it was very much like that. That was I think it captured the culture at that time. That movie.
Okay. So you got like guys like the alt-right and Richard Spencer and those kind of white nationalist types. Which just seems to be a more like sanitized because they will avoid words like hate. They say we just want their own like European ethno state kind of thing, but then based on
a lot of that's just pandering to outsiders too.
Yeah, loosely defined set of European values, which can't really be clearly defined because there is no uniform European value, right? Other than discolor your skin, maybe. That's true.
They look at the Nation of Islam actually and try to model stuff from them and copy them. And then whenever they're kind of blamed or someone judges them, they're like, well, the Nation of Islam says the same thing. We're in agreement. We want to be separate. That was kind of like, And then the late 2000s, they started having the rhetoric started to change. We're like, okay, the skinhead thing, being in groups, being in a gang, it's not really the way to go anymore. We need to have lone wolves. We need to wear suits and grow out our hair. And then that's where you get the alt-right the decade after.
Yeah.
That rhetoric was already starting like 2007.
Yeah. So the thing about the Nation of Islam, though, the Nation of Islam has a set of like coherent values, right? There's like a very specific like ideology there, right? There's a belief system around theologically even, right? That can be united upon. And when you talk to I actually had a conversation with Richard Spencer. And I was trying to ask him, I was like, what is it about because he's a secularist, right? He's anti-Christian. So I was like, automatically you being anti-Christian like cancels every majority of white Americans who might agree with you, because they're like super Christian. He's also not patriotic. He's not like about America. Like he's
you know why that is?
Why is that?
People always try to associate the word postmodernism with the left, but postmodernism is on the right too, and he's the right wing iteration of it. The whole alt-fact like kind of movement and alt-right movement and Trumpism to me is just right-wing postmodernism.
Okay.
It's kind of like a right-wing Hegelian, right-wing Nietzschean like way of thinking.
You know, is there a market for that in America? Like, if you take the religion out of it, right? Is there like a real market for that in the United States?
I don't think there's a lot of people that intellectually align with that.
Yeah, I don't either.
I do think a lot of the base is like evangelical Christians.
Yeah.
Who kind of see Trump as their protector.
Right. And I think Spencer flipped on Trump, right? He ended up like flipping on him like midway through his term at some point. And, you know, it was interesting because I was like, what about in Europe? Why don't you go to, but Europe, he's like, it's so divided. Everyone's different. I'm like, well, there you go. Like, I mean, it's like, yeah, you could have, you could have an ethno state with like 10 people that think like you. It's like a little village and you ain't bothering nobody, you know? So to me, it seems like sometimes it depends though, because in your community, when, you know, the cops are showing up and attorneys are showing up, that's a different ballgame. Now that can have serious ramifications. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The people in power, I mean, it reminds you of Mississippi burning, right? When those kids got shot by the cops and like the entire institution was like supporting the cops, and they like, I don't know what the final verdict was, but just seeing who was all involved in Philadelphia, Mississippi back in the 60s. But yeah.
What's that movie that they remade with The Rock? It's like Walking Tall or something. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I haven't seen like.
It's kind of a similar deal.
the ones I'm into the classic like Mississippi Burning with like Gene Hackman. You're looking it up right now.
Yeah, Walking Tall, 2004.
Okay.
That was like a Rock movie where he kind of came in and tried to become the sheriff of a town because the town, all the police were controlled by like this rich guy who had a casino or something. So.
Sure. So yeah. So anyways, like back to the religious journey. Where's that like? So you meet this guy online who's like he's like a what do you call it, polymath as far as languages goes?
Yeah, polyglot is kind of the
polyglot
term.
Okay.
Yeah, someone who knows multiple languages. And so we have this polyglot community on YouTube that really kind of got started like 2008, 2009. He was, I guess you might say, the most popular guy on YouTube until his recent passing. And he was telling me about Islam, and I ended up like taking it seriously and looking into it and becoming Muslim all just through the internet.
Okay, and then but also make cognizant of to keep it on the DL, because where you're living at the time isn't going to be the most friendly place towards Muslims.
Right.
You know, and how did your family react to that?
So for a long time, I didn't really tell all my family members. I remember, you know, I go to my dad's like on the weekends for visitation. They're divorced, and like we go up north fishing or something, right? And I bring my laptop with, and like we'd be like in a camp or in a cabin or whatever, and I have my laptop there, and I was reading a PDF of the Quran, and my dad didn't even know. You know, I was watching all kinds of YouTube videos. This was back when like the only videos on Islam was like Yusuf Estes and Bilal Phillips and like the very beginning of like Eddie the Dean show.
Old
I was
school Eddie,
watching
yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yusha Evans
Yeah.
and this is like 2009, 2010 era, right? And I decided like it matched with what I believed. I'm like, this, if God were to exist,
Yeah.
Tawheed is the most logical way that there could be a God. It's the
Mm.
most logical explanation. It made sense to me more than any other theology. And yeah, I think I told my mom right away because my mom's a little more liberal. And I said, "Oh, Mom, I became Muslim. It's what I believe." And I said, "Okay." She didn't think nothing of it until like she heard about it from like, somebody else and then came down on me about it. But,
I don't.
with my dad, I was planning to like wait, find the right moment, maybe after a few months, like tell him. But my little brother just ratted me out one day. And I was like real scared what my dad was about to say to me. Because my dad just brought it up randomly in conversation. I had no idea he knew. He's like, "So I heard you became Muslim." And my dad's like, I told you he likes lifting weights, a big guy.
Yeah.
He's a former Marine, always had the flat top cut.
Right.
And so I like freaked out. And I was sitting right next to him, we're in the truck together. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a long story. And he's like, "Well, I believe you're going to burn in hell. I'm Christian. I believe Jesus is our savior." And I'm like, okay. I'm going to disagree with that. And he's like, "Okay." And then it's like conversation was done and we never really talked about it again.
And that is like a lot of people would like kill for that kind of experience. To be honest,
not a fun one.
I mean, it was quick. But were there repercussions? Like he didn't like disown you or nothing, right? It's kind of like
No, I feel like he's a little more distant to me though than my little brother.
I see. I got you. So there is something there. Okay, I hear you.
But
all right,
we're cordial. We're on good terms. We text each other and things like that, and call each other. And
okay. So then you're in Minnesota, which is obviously you mentioned earlier, like large Somali population, and you have like mashayikh there, like Sheikh Walid Menisi. That we were, we can get into that. But did you like link up with the community pretty early on there?
So I was in this little small town, right?
How far is that from Minneapolis?
It's an hour west.
Okay.
But I had a car, and I would drive there every Friday for Jumu'ah.
Okay.
Eventually, like I told my mom I became Muslim. She's like, "Yeah, whatever." Eventually, things started escalating, though, as she saw my behavior change. I wouldn't pour her alcoholic beverage no more.
Okay.
She'd be like, "Let's go to the store." And I'm like, "Give me 10 minutes. I need to pray first. This is Salah time."
Yeah.
And she would like explode, get mad about it. And I remember she wanted me to do hardcore. My first Ramadan, she wanted me to do like hardcore labor outside in like 95-degree weather. She wanted me to like, sand and restain the whole deck. Okay, that's back-breaking work.
Right.
And she would try intentionally to get me to break my fast. She'd bring me a cold glass of homemade lemonade, which she never did. She'd cook me the best food and bring it out to me in like the middle of the day, which she never did. And, I stayed strong with it. And I think she kind of realized like, this is really changing this guy. And she didn't like it because she believes religion shouldn't control your life or tell you what to do.
Okay.
And so eventually it escalated to the point where she kicked me out of the house and I didn't really have nowhere to go.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 19.
Okay. So still in community college?
I was just like, I think finishing my second year. So I was just kind of done with it anyways.
Okay. But you at this point had done pretty well, right? Okay. And then you're trying to get into like where, go to a 4-year college from there? Was that the plan?
Yeah, it was the plan. I didn't know where or what. My mom kind of kicked me out like right at the end of the program before I
Mhm.
could really think
Right.
about it too much. Like threw my whole life upside down. I had a duffel bag, just threw whatever books and a couple outfits in it, mostly
Mm.
books,
Yeah.
and hitchhiked my way to Minneapolis because she wouldn't let me take my own car.
Oh, really? You
Mhm.
so does that people still do that hitchhiking? Like,
I mean, I don't think it's legal, but I did it.
I mean, as far as like, it's more the point of like the world we live in. Like, people are more and more skeptical of strangers, right?
You
Like,
got to remember, this was a small town community. Everybody kind of knew each other. So like the people who picked me up, I had seen before.
oh, okay, so they were probably making a run to Minneapolis, or like,
Yeah,
hey, can I?
exactly.
So you end up in Minneapolis. I assume you're homeless at this point, right?
Yeah, basically. And I think I slept a couple nights. Like I never slept out in the street
Yeah,
at that time. I did before that when I ran away from home once. That's another story.
yeah.
But I got to sleep inside a couple masjids, and then eventually, like they hooked me up with an organization in Minnesota, Muslim organization, nonprofit called Building Blocks, and
Okay.
they help new converts. And so they sent a convert brother over because I was just at a like Somali masjid where like nobody really spoke English. And they had, some white convert brother come over, and he took me to Sheikh Walid's mosque,
Okay.
Walid bin Al Manisi. And that was on the whole like other side of Minneapolis. So it was a little bit of a drive. And I get there and I don't know what this guy's intention is with me. He didn't really tell me like why we're going there. He just says, we're going there to get you help.
Hmm.
I don't think he really knew either, but they told him to bring me there or something.
Sure.
And I sit down in the musalla, and Sheikh Walid bin Idris al-Manisi, who's like one of the major ulama in America here, biggest one in Minnesota, so to say, was given a like lecture, a class, and I think it was on. I had some knowledge of Islam at this point. I had read some books and watched a
Yeah.
bunch of YouTube videos. I knew like a little bit. He talked for 2 hours on the fiqh of weeping during a funeral.
Okay.
Okay, so something like super specialized
Sure.
for 2 hours.
And this was English or Arabic?
This was in Arabic, but there was a couple people there who were live translating into English.
Okay.
And so I kind of realized right early on in my Islam what real Islamic scholarship looks like, the level that can be achieved.
Right, because
And
he's
I didn't,
like he's like on the like is I don't know, he's one of the I think he's on the board. I knew of him when I first heard of him was like maybe like 15 years ago. Um he was the guy like I would hear him as like having the most knowledge in Quran, right? As far I think as far as tafsir, exegesis, people go like you would hear because someone in America is big time when you would hear like in general the world, but you would hear people like going from other cities to go to Minneapolis.
not only that, but the thing that kind of made me realize how big a scholar he was that whole first year that I was there. Uh, there was countless people who came from the Middle East just to study with him.
Okay, so not even just in the U.S., globally, people are coming
Right,
in.
globally, people are coming to
Mhm.
take classes with him.
Now, how old is he?
If I had to guess now, he might be in his 60s,
Okay.
maybe late 50s.
Hmm.
That's just a guess. Allahu A'lam. I don't
Right,
like to
right.
guess people's ages.
No, but like, but I think you sometimes, I was reflecting upon this the other. It's something I've always had this like thought in my brain. I'm an engineer by profession, and I remember when I was graduating from Ohio State in 2007 with my mechanical engineering degree, I had the thought entered my mind. I wanted to defer my admission. I mean, my employment because I had got an offer, which brought me to Chicago, but I wanted to maybe wait 6 months because I wanted to go to like Mauritania just to go meet Sheikh Mohammed Salim. Well, do the Shankiti. He was the like I think the rector of Al Qura. That's where Sheikh Amr had studied, and he was known as the world's like foremost grammarian in Arabic at the time, and he passed away a few years back, but And then you recently hear about like Sheikh Ahmed Taha Rayan in Egypt, rahimahullah, who passed away. And you hear about these missions, and you're like thinking about like these people that we did not utilize. And you know, in Chicago, we have like Dr. Omar, Farooq Abdullah, Sheikh Amin, people you try to benefit from as much as possible, but also senior in age, right? Mainly Dr. Omar. And so now you're talking about Sheikh Walid, and I'm kind of like, it's kind of like getting my juices flowing. Like, this is someone who's, and it's still a relatively young age. I mean, that's not that old, but still, we don't know what Allah takes people, and the religion is lost. The ignorance, as we know, comes from the death of the scholars, right? That's how it's removed. And I think for not only from a point of, for me personally, it's not necessarily from the point of books, of the knowledge, information, but the adab, the etiquettes that you pick up and you remember, and those things like never go away. It's like when I went to Morocco and I met Moulay Hashim. He's like in his 80s, like he was the Khalifa of Sidi Muhammad ibn al-Habib, and just like how he hosted me, I was like, that these are like lessons that you like no book can teach you. That you can read it, but unless what you experience from a real human being, like that knowledge is transferred from like heart to heart, right?
It's true, you know, even Imam Ghazali, one of the things I really like about him is he emphasizes, you know, dhawq, or like tasting, which means experiential knowledge, right? You can study in the books, have your head in the books as much as you want, but unless you experience the things, you really don't know it, or you only partially know it.
Right.
You know, it's one thing to be here in America, eat Chinese food, study Mandarin, wear some Chinese clothes, but it's not the same as living in China.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyways, you kind of see what Islamic scholarship looks like, and then what happened? The Sheikh Walid like kind of become a mentor at that point, or
he did. What ended up happening is that there was two brothers who were of Sudani Arab background that were one of them was a live translator for Sheikh Walid. They ended up taking me into their place. They had a spare bed and they took me in and kind of helped me get back on my feet.
Okay. And then did you start like, did you go to a 4-year college at that point, or what was the as far as academically, what was next for you?
You know, at that time it was like survival. I was just worried about like just getting myself some stability, trying to find a job and all of that. So it was kind of the last thing on my mind was academics. And I eventually got a job at one of the Somali shopping malls called Suqa Carmel.
Okay.
And gave me some stability. My grandmother reached out to me. She had an extra room. She says, come stay with me.
And she lives she's in Minneapolis?
Yep.
Okay.
So I started having some stability, and I had, you know, lived on and off at her house before. So it's something familiar.
Yep.
It's on Chicago Avenue, 20 blocks south of where George Floyd was murdered. So I grew up in the area. I know that area very well. And the Somali Mall, I drive up every single day up Chicago Avenue, right past Cup Foods to go to work at the Somali Mall. Cup Foods is a halal store. I used to, you know, like shop there. They have a masjid in the basement. I used to pray there. Like that was my life back then. And Ramadan came again. I think this was my second Ramadan. And we were doing, I just finished like Taraweeh, and I was like bawling my eyes out, like from spiritual experience of Taraweeh. So I'm kind of sitting there sobbing, and I notice like everyone else is left. And then I feel a hand on my shoulder. And it was a white convert sheikh that I got to know. And he says, you know, I heard you were trying to go to Al Medina University, because I was trying to apply to go there. But back then, the application process wasn't in English. It was all in Arabic.
Okay.
And they required me to do all kinds of medical examinations and vaccines. And I didn't have health insurance, couldn't afford it. So I kind of like gave up on it, really depressed at that time in life because of that. And he said, I got an idea for you, the sheikh. He said, there's a really good linguistics program at the school, St. Cloud State University, and you can go learn some linguistics and be an ESL teacher overseas. And you can study Islam in an Arab country and like teach English. And so he convinced me, and I ended up moving to central Minnesota to attend this university. And I did my bachelor's degree in linguistics. At the same time, however, I had enrolled at the Islamic University of Minnesota in their like BA kind of program, like doing classes with them as well. So I was kind of doing both at the same time.
Would you say is Islamic University of Minnesota like like a more, it wouldn't be academics, but you like more like a madrasa style?
Yeah, they like to call themselves a university. They're not accredited, but it's basically just a traditional Arab madrasa.
Right. Okay. And then
But they
you're
kind of they have it's a little bit more structured like a Western university,
and
a little.
linguistics was up your alley because you're already interested in languages, right?
Exactly. So it just all kind of fit into place.
So that brother obviously had like some fortitude, had some you know insight just to give you that kind of advice. It wasn't something completely out of left field.
Yeah, looking back on it now, I think he had asked around about me, asked the community about me, and they had told him these things, you know.
Okay. Okay. Now, I want to ask you a little bit about, so the Islamic University of Minnesota. My understanding is they lean more towards like the Salafi or the Athari understanding of Islam, right? Um,
Yep. And so Minnesota, you know, I think is the Salafi stronghold of the United States, much more than Philadelphia.
oh, really? You think so?
Yep. But the thing that's funny about it is it's a lot of the youngins who are just watching YouTube and learning about things on YouTube or from the internet, that they kind of have this staunch mentality that's just typically associated with Salafism. But when you look at Sheikh Walid or the other, you know, shuyukh who have like real ilm, they're not like that. And they say Sufism is a part of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll teach, you know, Madarij al-Salikin from Ibn al-Qayyim, the student of Ibn Taymiyyah, which is a Sufi book, you know. It's a sharh of, what was it, some Sa'irin, can't remember it off the top of my head, but so, you know, they're in touch with a more balanced kind of approach to Islam, I guess you would say. Because, you know, like Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the things he always said, and later Ibn Uthaymin always said, was you take benefit from wherever you find it, and then you leave that which does not benefit. You have to be open-minded to dig around with every scholar, every group, every sect.
Yeah, I think Philadelphia. I had been to Philly and I've been to Germantown, but a lot of Philly it's almost more like that, like super Salafi Madakhila understanding of where it's almost like tied into the allegiance to like the royal family, and then like that kind of mindset as far as being quick to label people of people of innovation. You know what I mean? So it's like that's why there's that rap there, and there's always been this. I would say since even I started practicing the Deen back in like '04, most like mainstream type speakers that you even like if you talk to somebody from Al Maghrib Institute, right? Like Al Maghrib was perceived as a Salafi institution. But they would never they would like flee from the term. It like scared the hell out of them because of the connotations of what it meant to certain people in both the UK and the East Coast and how they were using the term.
It's strange because, you know, eventually when I did end up going overseas, they don't talk like that. They don't. The Sufi Salafi divide is something that's totally like unique to Western Muslims. Muslims overseas, they're not typically talking in those terms. And I feel like the subcontinent community brought with them this Deobandi Barelvi thing, which kind of like morphed more into the Sufi Salafi thing to make it go away from like just being associated with the Desi community, but like Arabs and people, other ethnicities could then kind of like talk in those terms, and it was like neutral terms, right?
I got you. So, you know, I remember when I was an undergrad, a lot of the brothers who we looked up to were from like the Middle East. They had come and they were like off the boat type too, right? They were either grad students, and they would talk about. I remember they would so they knew about like Sheikh Nur Hamim Kalar, and they didn't like him, even though they were like living in, and because so many of them, like I know it's one friend of mine, he's Iraqi, he was living in Jordan, right, before, and so he was against all those those individuals. So for my experience, they actually perpetuated some of that.
But they talk about it in a really different framework. That's kind of my main point. Is still this divide is kind of there, but like they're saying, oh, the Ash'ari, they're the ones we got to worry about, they're the mubtadi'un, or, whatever it may be.
Mm.
But it's not so much the Sufi Salafi terminology that they use.
Oh,
You
right.
know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. I feel you. I feel you. Yeah, so you start there. So that was I'd have to assume that that was your understanding of how you looked at Islam through that Salafi lens, correct?
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay.
I mean, I
And
didn't know anything else.
right. And now how like in when I met you, like I said in Chicago, at that first of all, I met you at we just said I met you at a kid's molid. So so usually Salafi and Molid don't exist in the same sense. Um
Yeah.
but like what got you thinking about other interpretations of Islam from that point on?
Well, really kind of, I felt like to this day, I still kind of feel like I'm Salafi in a sense, because like what really happened was that I kept hearing this name El Ghazali, El Ghazali, El Ghazali, like pop up over and over again from different places. And so, okay, who's this Ghazali guy? I better like, get to know him. So I think I like ordered off Amazon El Munqidh min al-Dalal, deliverance from error. And I just read it by myself and it blew me away. It was like every paragraph mind blown.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about Sufism as just being the experiential kind of part of Islam. And for him, that's what gave him certainty, was these experiences, not logical debates or arguments. And he talked about how he had gone and checked out every different sect that lived during his time, the Ismailis, this group, that group, the Fuqaha, the Sufis, and all this and that. And I found it extremely convincing. And so I started reading more and more, read like the English translation of the Alchemy of Happiness. That's like 2 volumes. And I eventually bought like an English translation of a full translation of the Ihya and all of these things. And I said, okay, there's more to the Sufism thing than I kind of understood before.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
at the
now,
same, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. Good, no, keep going. Yeah. So,
At the same time, I was saying Sheikh Walid would start teaching this book, Madarij Salikin, from Ibn al-Qayyim, which is a book on Sufism, basically, but from kind of more the Salafi perspective, you might say. And so I started just getting curious about these things and looking into it.
and it seems like Sheikh Walid, like being such a balanced individual, um, he allowed for that room for you to explore in that way, right?
I mean, I didn't really talk to him about Imam Ghazali in particular, it's just something I'm reading on my own.
Okay.
And you know, I started reading more about like what do Ash'aris actually say and believe? What do Maturidis actually say and believe? What do the different madhabs say and believe? What's the difference in usul al-fiqh between the different madhahib and all of that? And it just made me grow as a person and be more open-minded. And to this day, I don't like associate and say like, oh, I'm Athari, I'm Ash'ari, I'm Maturidi. It's like, I think they are all valid and I think they all have really convincing arguments equally.
Right, right. Yeah, I tell people, because I came from the Salafi background, specifically the Medkhali background, to be honest, and um, I haven't studied, like I've taken like Tahawiyah from like Ash'ari or Maturidi Mashayikh, right? But I
Mhm.
haven't. But I'm not. I wouldn't consider myself an Ash'ari or Maturidi. I still probably consider myself. If somebody grilled me, they'd be like, I'm probably an Athari still, because I think that like I just have that base level of belief, right? It's just I haven't researched it in a way to like come to that conclusion. In fiqh, I do my best to follow Madhab Imam Malik, rahimahullah, right? And then as far as tasawwuf goes, it's like there's like I certainly am okay with the idea of giving bay'ah to a tariq in a tariqah or to a sheikh, right? I haven't done it personally, but I'm certainly open to the idea of it, right? And that's kind of my approach. And I think, yeah, I agree with you. It's like it's a more healthy approach, and sometimes when you see these people fight over stuff, like you see when you make content on this channel or the Mad Mamluks, you see people on the comments, and you're thinking like, yeah, that was me like 10 years ago. If that was me 15 years ago, like you'll get there eventually. It'll like some people you gotta let people when they embrace religion, or any kind of, this is the first thing they learn, they're going to gravitate towards that and then like hold on to it because it's like something precious in a way, which is
Right.
in a way kind of unique and beautiful. Um, but it can also have repercussions because you can come off as a jerk to others.
You can harm people.
Yeah, you know. So and you can do, and the thing is sometimes the damage, and I think that's what I appreciated about Dr. Yasser Qadi recently. He's someone that I've known for like 16 years now, and he recently, I think on his recent one of his library chats, kind of openly kind of owns up to the fact that he like um acknowledges that the repercussions on other people that maybe stuff he had taught may have done, right? Because in the
Mhm.
beginning, he had mentioned stuff like how he doesn't agree with this, and he's changed his view on Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and he has this take on the Najdi Dawah, right? And some
Yeah.
of us were sitting back like, okay, that's fine, but like, what about all these people, these young? Because we all looked up to him, and we were in our early 20s, mid 20s, and because of what we learned from him, we accuse other Muslims of being upon shirk or kufr, and like saying like don't take from this sheikh or that sheikh or saying that, and like causing rifts in our community. And then finally, I think recently he just owned up to that. He's like, yeah, I apologize because that does have material repercussions, right? You can
Mhm.
like split up masajid into sects. You can, create waves and families. I know brothers in Columbus who did not pray Eid with their parents on the same day, right? It was different. So yeah, in one way it's, it's a beautiful thing because you have this like fresh zealousness and it's passion, and but then if it's not redirected the right way, and I think that's the important part of having a teacher, like a
Right.
murabbi kind of figure that can guide you, which you're not going to get on the internet.
No,
I
you
mean,
can't.
there's no, even if you're taking online classes, it could be with a reputable sheikh. But I feel like if he's not seeing you in person, if you're not having coffee with him or tea with him or eating with him
Right.
and hanging out with him, that's when you're not going to get that.
It's the suhbah,
Right, exactly,
the
the companionship.
companionship.
So then, how did you go for? So you finished up at St. Cloud at St. Cloud University, was it?
Mhm. St. Cloud State
St. Cloud
University. Yeah.
State. You got your degree in linguistics, and then was you Chicago next after that?
No, so I told you I was also going to the Islamic University kind of at the same time or taking classes with them and things like that. Even like before I was officially enrolled, like the first thing they had me do, like what you had mentioned is Al-Aqidah Tahawiyah. That was like the first matan I ever memorized. Right. So I was kind of active in studying and doing all these types of things as well on the side and learning Arabic and whatnot. And so I was just kind of finishing my program, and they had Sheikh Walid invited a big scholar from Syria whose name was Samir al-Nas, and he was going to go over all of Sahih al-Bukhari in like 1 week, like an intensive. And so, man, I got to do this, and it like coincided with like a break I had with like the end of my program, and so I went to it, and well, this sheikh is, people will call him a Sufi sheikh, and all of his students who came there were Sufis and had the prayer beads and all these things, and so I witnessed all that, and I witnessed how Sheikh Walid had brought this person, said this was my former teacher in Riyadh who used to teach me Quran. I got ijazah Quran from him,
So Sheikh
and how he,
Samer was Sheikh Walid's teacher.
right. And so I could
Okay.
see like the level of respect they had for each other.
Mhm.
And Sheikh Walid is like well known for having the best manners and character, and Sheikh Samar as well. So watching them interact and the people around them, it was amazing, and it changed my life. And I did this whole Sahih Bukhara, like maqra, like a reading of it, and got ijazah for, ijazah to sama' for Sahih al-Bukhari. And I brought a couple friends with me and met a lot of interesting people along the way, and got to ask these Sufi people, what's your belief? What's your practice? And figured out that things are really not much different,
Mm-hmm.
and it really opened my mind a lot. And then ever since then, whenever Sheikh Samra came to the United States, I'd follow him, go to his programs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, he's like, And
I made
then
a personal relationship with Sheikh Samar, you know, and so I had Sheikh Walid and Sheikh Samar who were kind of like my guys. So they're
I
some of my
mean,
teachers.
that's a lethal combo, my man. I mean, I mean that's a lot. So now, so then you do that, and then when did you end up at U Chicago?
So when I was there doing the Sahih Bukhari program,
Yeah.
they were advertising that they're going to start a master's program for Islamic studies at the Islamic University there. So I enrolled in that.
Oh, in Minnesota. Okay.
Yep, Islamic University in Minnesota. And I was taking classes with them. Like we did Zad al Mustaqna, which is like a medium level Hanbali text. We did like Nukhbat al Fikr and Hadith, um, uh, al Waraqat and Usul Fiqh, and I think it was Ma'arij al Qubur, or so, I think that's the name of the book, and Aqidah. And, you know, it was just a really good program. And it was online technically, but you could also go in person. So I would drive there every week. It was on Sundays and do this program while I was still just at the tail end of my bachelor's degree program. And the last semester of my bachelor's degree program, they offered, like, for the first time, an introduction to Islam class in their religious studies department. And they had Middle East history as an elective. I had some room for electives. I took both of those classes as well.
Okay.
And so I started talking to the professors, you know, I've taken these classes. I realized, I'm like, wait, you can like study about Islam in like the regular Western university. I didn't know they did that. And I talked to these professors. I'm like, this could be the career for me, you know, just outside of my traditional Islamic studies. Like I have that over here compartmentalized, and this historical kind of stuff with the Middle East and Islam I can do as a job.
Mm-hmm.
And so they told me, you know, various programs that had like Islamic studies in the Western universities in the country. Like they gave me a list, these professors. So you could apply to these ones to do your master's degree at. And I'm a Midwestern boy. I love Minnesota. There's no reason for me ever to want to really leave Minnesota, best state in the union. And so the closest one was University of Chicago. It was only 6-7 hour drive or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll apply there then. I had no idea that this was like some kind of fancy school. Never heard of it before.
No kidding. Okay.
Yeah. And it was the only one I applied to. And I just like applied. And like towards the end of the application process, I found out that it's basically like a fancy Ivy League school.
Or Ivy League caliber, right? Not
Right,
not
yeah.
not official Ivy League, but on that level, right?
But it's an R1 research institution.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like ranked 10th in the country when at that time.
Yeah.
And I started crying. I said, oh, there's no way I'll get into this place. I barely passed high school. I just went to like community college and some state university. Like I didn't have like super good grades in the state university. I had like a B plus, A minus type GPA.
Okay.
And I'm like, man, I don't know. Like I freaked out, but I'm like, whatever. I'm like, I got all these materials together. I already like did everything for the application process. So I'm just going to submit it.
And you did your GRE and all that?
Yep. I was just like, tawakkul ala Allah. And I just sent it.
Okay.
And I got accepted.
And do you know why?
I mean,
From a
I really
material
don't.
point of view, from because I applied to U Chicago when I was in high school. I graduated high school in 1999. I graduated high school, and U Chicago at the time used to have a pretty high acceptance rate, 55% or something, or 58%. The reason is that nobody applied. Okay, nobody applied because their reputation was they will just flunk you out. They would put you in this meat grinder and spit you out. People couldn't hang, right? It was not a party school, right? You know what I'm saying? There was this like you're talking to you're talking to people who are not from Chicago, and they're like South Side. Oh no, you're like you're gonna get mugged, you know, all that stuff. And the year I applied, the admission rate just tanked. I think there was an article or something that came out that year about Chicago, because Chicago was, I mean, academically is out like, is always known for the economics program, I think, right? And then even the Islamic studies program is always well known. So I applied. I took an L, didn't get in, and then I was like, and at that point, and from that point onward, it was like I saw it becoming like more like you saw the rankings. I think back then it was like 18th, 19th in the country, and
Mm.
then like now it's because top 10, top 5, even the business schools there, but even the undergrad, it was like this. Yeah, it was just, it was a grind. So yeah, so somehow you got in. You never asked the admissions committee like why me, based upon like because based upon what you told me on your stats, and it's a small school in central Minnesota, community
Yeah, you ask
college.
anybody about St. Cloud State, they don't know it.
Yeah,
Never heard of
you're
it.
gonna be like, what the hell? Like, how did that happen? Right? Did you like nail your GRE or something or?
So I tried to ask about this, but the professors, they don't want to tell you too many details because they don't want it to leak like how the process goes, right?
Okay,
Yeah, but they
it's
ended
probably
up
white
telling me.
privilege.
I mean, it's definitely a part of it, undoubtedly. But they told me that, because you had been studying Arabic and you demonstrated that you knew Arabic, like in your writing sample, and you had a good writing sample. I wrote on Imam Ghazali's thought and the Ihya Ulumuddin, and how it's structured and how it developed and how the historical events that happened in Imam Ghazali's life contributed to how this book came into being.
Okay.
That was kind of like my research paper that I used as my writing sample. And the GRE, I had a above average, like, what was it? They had like a writing section, and there was another section that was kind of like analysis or logical analysis, something like that. And the math, they said I remember I called them when I was like applying. They said, we don't care about the math. You can get 0 on the math. We don't care. Like it's not needed for Islamic studies.
Okay. And
So I just guessed. I just guessed on every math question. I didn't even read them.
what was your focus on it once in your master's program? What was your specialty? Islamic history?
So I told them like you have the statement of purpose that you write, telling them kind of like what you want to do. And I told them that I wanted to research the history of the Hanafi madhab and look at authority within the madhab. Like who were the big movers? Who were the like Ahlul Tarjih, who kind of made major shifts in the trajectory of the madhab? What are the different strains of it? And that was kind of what I wanted to do.
And so are you a Hanafi by practice as well?
Yeah, it was kind of like divine providence, like tawfiq, that I met Sheikh Samar when I did, because at that time, after like studying comparative usul fiqh, I was like, well, the Hanafis make the most sense to me, and I had just started studying it myself, and so I got interested in that, and that's kind of why I wanted to research it.
What are the differences between the Hanafi madhab as far as you see from like the school of Deoband, which you probably were exposed to if you're in Chicago, um, versus like the what you see in a Sham or maybe the Ottomans? Could you touch on that a little bit? Is that a
Well, I mean, just as like a lay person or just as like a practicing Muslim, like you go into a Deobandi masjid or even Barelvi masjid, and kind of the first thing I notice is like big, huge beards.
right?
Okay. And a kind of strictness and conservatism about things that I did not see with the Arab Hanafis, and just kind of a different approach to things, like you give this bayan in Urdu ahead of time, and then you give the khutbah just in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of some little things like that I noticed as a layperson when I, became academic and started doing research on it. Kind of the major thing that the Barelvis and Deobandi started doing in terms of Hanafi fiqh is they started talking about Sufism quite a lot in their Hanafi Fatawa collections.
Okay.
And they kind of made these acts a part of fiqh. And so that is also a big, I guess you could say, contribution that they made in that regard. It was the controversies that they had between one another, but also the Nizami curriculum was a major, I guess you could say, a stepping stone or contribution to the Islamic world, because that's pretty much what all Hanafis use across the world now.
But that's like you even in like the Arab region, you have a semblance of that, or because you hear about Dars Nizami in the Deobandi tradition.
Mm-hmm. It's more or less the same texts. They might teach it in a little bit different or use different shuruh, but the base texts, where you have like Nur al-Idah, Kanz al-Daqa'iq, al-Hidayah, those like seminal texts, all Hanafis are studying.
I think it's like you alluded to as a non-Hanafi, right? I mean, that's what I was raised as a kid without like my parents really understanding it, right? But it's like when you look at it, you see like the Ottomans, or you see like the Syrian Hanafis, and it's like the beard, it's like the look, right? And you look at the Hanafi Fatawa, and it was like when I remember I would ask like a Hanafi, because my beard is obviously not that long. I remember I would ask a Hanafi sheikh about it one time, and when I moved to Chicago, and it's like there's ijma that it has to be fistful. The only difference of opinion is do you cut it after the fist length or not, right?
Yeah, so that shows to me kind of the insularity that Deobandis have always had, because they're like kind of a counterculture movement. A lot of their madrasas are out in the rural areas, and the Brehlevis kind of make up the popular religion of the masses, so to say.
Okay.
And so they're very insular. They have their own fatwa collections in Urdu, their own scholars who wrote in Urdu, and they look back and look at that. From a historical point of view, there isn't ijma about the beard in that regard. A lot of scholars from all four madhahib have disagreed about it.
I got you. Cool. I want to segue a little bit. So you at U Chicago, you finished your master's and whatnot. But a lot of what's on your YouTube channel is a lot more like, I guess, secular history, post-colonial studies. In the world we live in today, there's just trying to get an understanding of stuff. There's so much noise. We live in a social media world. One thing I appreciate about you, and maybe you're doing this and I'm not seeing it, but is that you don't seem to be caught up in a lot of social media like riffraff, if you know what I'm saying. You make your content on YouTube, right? And then you put it out, and it is what it is, right? I don't see you like tweeting at people, having beef with people. I don't see you on Clubhouse getting like, getting bullied or fighting somebody. You know what I'm saying? I don't see that. But like with the kind of content I create, it's part of like the baggage that comes with it is that you've got to engage the audience. You can't just put out content and like it can be very polarizing, right? And one thing I've come to realize is that like if I'm going to be honest, like I'm like I did my degree's in engineering, okay? You study what you studied in high school, whatever they taught you in high school. And I tweeted about this like I think last week or 2 weeks ago. It's like I'll be 40 later this year, and I feel like there was like an update to my system that was missed. Like all of a sudden, there's this conversation about things like patriarchy and power dynamics and critical race theory that just showed up. I don't know nothing about it, but I'm expected to have the right position about it, whatever that is. Okay. So I was wondering if we could maybe like walk through like how, because you and I would agree that Islam at the end of the day is our main worldview, right? Our main paradigm. But now we have to engage in the world as it is. And we have these tools that people have done research. There's academic work on it, etc. There's works being written. How do we navigate that? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like where do you even start? And the frustration, and I see frustration with people on both sides. People like I would consider myself probably more right leaning, if I'm going to be frank. And I think it's my disposition. When I was an undergrad, I was a treasurer of the College Republicans. This is even before I was like really serious about Islam. I used to be a Republican. Yeah, I was a treasurer of College Republicans before I was the MSA president. Like 2 years, it was 2 years removed, right? Yeah. And then I kind of got away from that stuff. When I was a Salafi, I was like politics. I was apathetic towards it. I was like, they're all jacked up. It's whatever kind of thing. And the other challenge is that like, so you're expected to have an opinion. Your time is finite. You can't read everything. we are obviously, like, I feel myself, I'm falling short in basic Islamic, reading Quran, doing athkar, reading Islamic texts, educating myself about the religion again, which is the primary paradigm. But then I've got to like somehow figure out a way to like understand what's going on, because because like stuff I do as a podcaster, guests I bring on, conversations I have, like people like I deal with the fall, and I'm the kind of guy that I've always been like, listen, people were like, we'll just brush it off, don't care. I'm like, I got a problem. If other Muslims have a problem with me, I got a problem. That's how I look at it, because I think we're an ummah. I think we're not like, if some, like, I don't expect everyone to like me, or you know what, I don't even know that at the same time I know that I don't like everybody, even if they're Muslims. But I think I think like we're losing this like basic decorum of knowing, understanding what the ummah is, of knowing what brother and sister are. And I'm just like, man, where do I start? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like I've acknowledged, I was having a conversation last week on Clubhouse in a locked room with Dr. Yasser Morsi. You know, are you familiar with him?
I do not know him, no.
Okay, he's a professor in he's a psychologist. He wrote this book called White Skins Muslim Mask or something. It's like a play on Fanon's book or something like that. He's in Australia. We were having a talk. He's really popular in the Australian community. He's known as like a CRT kind of guy. He's very, amongst Muslims, he's like super polarizing, right? People either hate him or they love him, right? I found him to be pretty pleasant, to be honest, in a conversation I had. I haven't read his stuff, but like only thing I hear about him are like either from people who love him or hate him, and it's kind of like I'm like I don't have a dog in this fight, but it would just so happen that like, you know, we were able to, you know, talk for about 15-20 minutes. But you know, I don't know, man, where do you start? Where do you start like talking about like how do you weave like I guess when you're talking about epistemology, that's what it's about. Like, how do we know what we know? Like, I mean, can we just kind of walk through that a little bit?
What counts as evidence and which evidence is stronger and all those types of things.
Yeah, and then understanding your own biases and understand, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so for me, you know, I started out as a new Muslim in like a very Islamic environment, you know, at the Islamic University in Minnesota, where we studied, you know, like the basic kind of seminal texts, you know, Umdatul Fiqh and Hanbali Fiqh, you know, like I mentioned, Aqidah Tahawiyya. There was one like Islamic Creed series from Umar al-Ashqar, who was a student of Albani, that have been fully translated in English. After reading Al-Aqidah Tahawiyya, I read that. I think it's like 8 volumes. I read that whole thing. Someone donated it to me because they saw how studious I was, alhamdulillah, and I read it. You know, just getting a basic foundation in texts, you know, that would be considered foundational. I think it's more important for us in the West to really do that, because we have all these conflicting ideas coming from outside the Islamic tradition that we're constantly exposed to, more than people in the East. People in the East are getting more and more exposed to it now with globalization, and these are remnants of colonization and all that. But really, we're in the bastion of the West. And so I feel like you have to get that first, that foundation, that base, right? Just like we're talking about building a base with bodybuilding and muscles, you got to build the base with the muscle of your mind as well. And so I say, you know, I tell a lot of Muslims nowadays who maybe like they're in whatever kind of career and they want to take a pause and go study Islam, I said, go do like a 1-year intensive or a 2-year intensive, you know, whatever you're able to accommodate in your life. But you do have to make sacrifices to get knowledge. That's just, there's no way around it. But if you're ready to do that, you know, go do something like that. You know, like you have Al Medina Institute down in Georgia, where they do a 1-year intensive. There's different programs like that. The Deoband have their own intensive courses as well. And, you know, whatever
Chicago's got Darul Qasim. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you can go find it, you know. And when you have a good solid base and you feel confident that you've, you know, done some basic texts like on each of the different Islamic sciences, then we have to deal with Western thought, because that's where we live, right? So if you're confused about, let's say, these feminist ideas like what's patriarchy or what's white privilege or what's these things that, especially the past 10 years, the rhetoric has become much more mainstream. We have to go to the original theorists behind those theories. And not everybody's studious, not everybody's philosophical, not everybody can sit and read books or have time for that. But, you can find like videos on YouTube, what's feminism for dummies? What's patriarchy for dummies type videos, and just get an idea as to what people are saying authentically from their own point of view about these things. Learn who the big thinkers are, who's Judith Butler, who are the philosophers behind these movements, because that just trickles down to like the lay people, and the lay people might be crazy or fanatic about it when actually the academic is not.
Right.
And it's just for us to just kind of figure out what's going on. So Imam Ghazali in his day, when Imam Ghazali was studying under Imam Juwayni, they had all this controversy about philosophy from Ibn Sina. And so they're kind of like, wait, we need to slow down, figure out what's going on here. They're saying stuff that sounds like kufr to us. And they actually sat down and read meticulously all these texts from Ibn Sina and the kind of philosopher type people. And Imam Ghazali, what did he do? He published a textbook, like Introduction to Philosophy. So everybody knew, okay, he's a master of philosophy. Even the philosopher camp was like, yes, that's a great book. And then he comes with the refutation of philosophy, incoherence of the philosophers, right? Tahafat al-Falasifa.
Okay.
And so I feel like as Muslims in the West too, we kind of have to have that same approach, maybe just on a smaller scale, whatever we're capable of, where we try to figure out, okay, what are they really actually saying to us? And not just the lay people, but the academics or the scholars, as much as you can comprehend it. And then try to understand it sincerely, and then go, okay, so what does the Islamic tradition say about this? Are there good things from Western feminism that we can take? Are there things that go completely against the Islamic tradition? It goes all back to that same principle I mentioned before. You take good where you find it, and you leave that which does not benefit.
And then it's, but I think the important thing is that you mentioned is that you sort of start with the Islamic base. You got to know Islam first.
Right.
You got to know basic creed, your fardul ayn as far as like what you get to do, fiqh, etc. And then having a tarbiyah like from the tasawwuf or tazkiyat an-nafs, whatever you want to call it, so you know how to interact. Because what happens is that like, if you like, so for example, like what I've read, I haven't read. I asked, I don't know if you know, brother, like one of my friends, he actually I asked him. He started, he did his undergraduate in Northwestern. He's a brother from the South Side. And I was like, if I wanted to read about critical race theory, what would be the book? Who would you recommend? Right? Everyone talks about Frantz Fanon, but he said he gave me a guy by the name of David Mills. He used to be a professor at Northwestern. I think he's at UIC now. I think he's like Jamaican, I want to say. Okay. And I looked him up. It's on Scribd, right? He's like, that'll be a nice intro. And I asked my friend because he was someone who's like, he seems to have a balance. He's like, there's an underground reality, because he's like telling me, he's an African American Muslim man. He's like, listen, I'll be honest with you, like some of this stuff's like a foreign language when they the way they talk about it in the academy, right? And then I see what I see on the streets of Chicago with violence and like shootings and stuff, and it's like there's part of it is so it's like got to be used as a tool. You got to have the capacity to use it as a tool when necessary to understand things, right? I think the problem with social media is that these loaded terms get thrown out. And because feminism, if you say feminism, I've been in the clubhouses rooms in the last few weeks where, you people would say Islam is inherently a feminist religion, okay, and that is just such a loaded statement. That
it can be,
what I mean? That like people or I've seen brothers that have like signs, Allah wants me to be a feminist. Kind of thing, right? And it sets off this like visceral reaction, and there might be, so it seems like there's obviously like some good intent there, but then people are like, well, what about all this and this and this? I think for one, we should avoid using language of the right or the left in America and then try to frame it in Islamic terms. Like Islam wants us to be capitalists because Islam's a free market. You know what I mean? Either way, I think that's where we need to get away from that. What are your thoughts on that as far as like in our dialogue in our language using things where like some brother was saying on some clubhouse room the other day, like I'm a socialist Muslim, right? I
Okay.
mean, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, and he gave examples of why that works, and then he got countered with why that doesn't work. And I was like, wouldn't this be easier not to like use that label? Like, because it's even with the right. You have these brothers who are like the red pill bros or the alpha guys, right? And you know, the ideal thing, and some brother messaged me on Instagram. He's like, how do we like become like how do we do like do you recommend this red pill stuff or alpha stuff or whatever? And I was like, listen, it might work for you, but whatever you do is stop talking about it. Don't like say you're this. If it jives with you, just put in practice. But you don't got to talk about it. Because once you start using terms, automatically people are like, oh, you're one of those kind of people, or you're this, you're a leftist Muslim, or you're from the right, or you know what I mean? And it's just like, then conversation just goes to hell. Like it's already because people, it's convenient because we're intellectually lazy. We want to box people in, right? I was having a conversation with a friend trying to explain, and a friend who doesn't live in America. I was kind of telling him like, listen, some of these guys, you know, they don't agree with how you guys are virtue signaling some of the race stuff because we live in America and this is our reality. And if I told one of my African American brothers, like, you know, not caring about like some academic work, etc., on decolonization because they're more interested in like day to day, like trying to stay alive, and you told them, oh, you're just brainwashed by white supremacy. I mean, I'm sorry, my friend would probably punch me in the face, right?
Even though it may be true.
Yeah, exactly, right. But because there's a type of like, you know, sentiment there. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of yeah. So I know I give you a lot there, but like, so just to start, if you did you just take it philosophy by philosophy, like, and then kind of, or do you think about or do you think about like by issue, like feminism? If that's what's right now, that's on your radar. You go back to the origins of feminism and then go from there.
Well, you know, all of this that you've told me, what I think back to is in the early Islamic period, like
Yeah.
during the time of the four Imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmed bin Hanbal, you know, during that time when we had like Layth and Awza'i and, you know, the big thing to do, because it was still very much an oral culture, this is before the Islamic world really got paper, is they would have debates, munadhara, you know, jadala, like these types of different debates that they would do, jadal, you know, right. Disputation, argumentation in public with one another. And, you know, you can go and read them. Some of them are even in translation. Ahmed al-Shamsi translated a lot of them in his book, The Canonization of Islam. You can go read them and see how they interacted and talked with one another. And I think you know, we've both been in Chicago. You know, in Chicago, we have Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah. And one of the things that he always reiterates is this book called Plastic Words from Uwe Pürksen, I think is how you pronounce his name. But it was originally a German book. They translated it into English. You can find it, you know, PDF pretty easily out there. But you have these words that like feminism or patriarchy or critical race theory or whatever, that they're triggers for people, but a lot of times they don't really have a lot of meaning themselves. And so my first thing is why is that giving you a visceral reaction? First, we should do introspection. Think about ilm an-nafs, you know, the psychology of ourselves, the tazkiyah, the tarbiyah, you know, that aspect, like, okay, why am I reacting this way? Is this because my nafs? Is this because I'm having an ego? Like what's going on here? And then secondly, you want to ask the person, what do you mean by that? because these are empty plastic words. People mean all different kinds of things by these words, by socialism or communism or capitalism or what have you, anarchism, libertarianism, all these different things we hear about. Everybody's got their own idea about them, and communists debate with each other all the time. What is communism? And so I'll ask, what do you mean by that? Instead of trying to box them in. And I feel like this attitude of trying to box people in is something that's like a remnant of the anti-intellectual Protestant culture that's dominated America throughout its history. We got to remember, it was like hardcore Salafi Christians, AKA the Puritans, who separated from the Anglican Church, came and founded America. And our culture is an extension of that in a lot of different ways. And later on, the immigrant communities that came in, Germans, Irish, a lot of them were also Protestants, some Irish more Catholic, but like Protestantism is still the dominant culture in America, even though we become more secular with the Western world. But I would argue that secularism has a lot of elements of Christianity in it. It's not that secular is another one of those plastic empty words. Well, what do you mean by secular? What does that really mean? It evolved out of all these wars that the Protestants were having with one another and the Catholics. And they said, okay, we need to get like religion kind of out of the public sphere so that we stop killing each other. Like, it has this whole history to it. And I think we need to try to reflect on that and think about those things as much as possible, not be so quick to just jump at people when they say these things. Because if I tell somebody I'm a socialist Muslim and they start asking me about it, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's just what Islam says.
The next question would be like, well, why would you use that label if it's redundant?
I feel like these labels, that's just what the lay people are using out in the streets. And sometimes you got to speak that way so that people understand where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just an attention getter too.
Right.
Like a clickbait title thing that gets people's attention. You get, okay, now I'm going to tell you about this socialist Islam. And what is it? We give sadaqah to each other. We're paying zakat. We're pulling resources. We're a jama'ah. We're not just, ahlul sunnah wal infirad. No, we're a jama'ah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you got to ask people, what do they mean by these things?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what about like when you see people that are seen as authorities? So someone like Michel Foucault, right? I think you mentioned one of his books is on one of your reading lists, one of your videos, right? Relatively modern individual, okay? Mm-hmm. So would he be someone would he be like a root of a philosophy, or is he more like more of a modern interpret, because people that's what people see. Even Fanon isn't that he isn't that old, right? I mean, recent, it's last 100. We're talking last 100 years.
Yeah, so like Foucault and Fanon were kind of active during the same time, but Fanon I think is a little bit older.
Okay.
And basically, Michel Foucault, I generally find him distasteful. He just kind of takes the Nietzschean paradigm and builds on it.
Okay.
And I think Nietzsche is just a great big shaitan, but that's a whole nother can of worms. Mm-hmm. But he has this amazing book, and he comes out of the French tradition. So, I did my undergraduate degree in linguistics, and like the father of linguistics is a Frenchman they call Ferdinand Saussure.
Okay.
And he started what was known as structural linguistics. From that built structural anthropology. There's a very famous French psychoanalyst named Jacques Lacan who built on that theory of structuralist linguistics. It's sometimes just called structuralism. And he says that the whole subconscious is ordered through language. Kind of his basic argument. He's a very complex thinker. And then Foucault builds on him. You have Jacques Derrida, who kind of refutes a little bit of structuralism, but it's still very much within that paradigm. Foucault emerges out of that context. So he takes all of that with Nietzsche, because he knows German very well, read a lot of the German philosophers, takes this all together, and that's how you get his kind of way of thinking. The reason I recommend one of his books, he had his first famous book that put him on the spot as an academic, like put him on the scene, made him famous. It's called The Order of Things. And he traces the history of Western thought and how it changed from like the medieval dark ages, from the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, where they start talking about like, we have science. This is a scientific type of discipline over here. Psychology is now a science, where before it might have been a kooky thing. You know, this thing shifts and becomes a recognized science, this field over here and this field over here. Whereas in the past, they might never have been a field, or they were thought to be some quack sort of thing. So he traces the history of where all these modern categories of knowledge come from. And I feel like we can't understand the world we live in unless we know that history. And his book is really good in that regard. And it's not that hard. I mean, there might be a lot of new words in it that non-academics don't know, but it's just a matter of a Google search.
Right.
Search that word and, oh, okay, now I know that word.
But based upon what I was hearing from you earlier, wouldn't it make more sense to read Nietzsche first? And then the philosophers the people he's quoting from, like that, the guy who said the father of modern linguistics, that French guy, Sassar, or...
Well, I mean, with Foucault, the way that he does history, sure, he'll inject some of this philosophy into it here and there. But for the most part, that book, he's just doing history.
Okay.
I mean, he's primarily a historian who just kind of, people attached really to his philosophy and analysis. And that's kind of his legacy in like the Western academic world nowadays.
So it's kind of like a Cliff's Notes too. It's like if you read Foucault, you'll get an understanding of the people before what, like he's giving you the update, Cliff's Notes of Nietzsche in a sense.
Yeah, he's giving you a whole genealogy of Western thought, and then through him, you're also getting the recent modern kind of update of it too.
Right.
His kind of theory with it.
Yeah, if people want to check that out. But I got a question in the comments. Can you ask Hamza what he thinks of the traditionalists like Wonan? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And Ebola, is it like Ebola with a V? You know, he's talking about.
I'm not familiar with these particular people, but the traditionist camp or traditionalist camp is like, I don't read their books in particular, but I agree with their baseline assumption, which is that modernity, meaning the Enlightenment and most of Western thought, needs to be subverted. We need to revive our own indigenous Islamic way of thinking, because a lot of modern Islamic thinking has had so much Western thought injected to it that we even forget what our own tradition is.
You know, you mentioned, so in that light, was that because you were saying something about how Muslims we've adopted this kind of like Protestant puritanical lens of viewing everything, right? How can you like that was like, and you were telling me this before we started recording. I was like, hold up, you cannot say that now. That sounds like podcast material. So go for it. Can you break that down? Like, what do you mean? Like, explain your point again for those, because obviously people weren't listening when we were not recording. But
so in I believe late 1700s, it was Napoleon invaded France, and this was a shock to the Muslim world. And it was really the first time that the Muslim world had to deal with the West as someone more powerful, even though it was temporary. They were eventually pushed out of Egypt.
Wasn't Napoleon wasn't he French?
Right.
You said he invaded France.
Invaded Egypt, I'm sorry.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Invaded Egypt. So
okay.
The Muslim world was dealing with him for the first time, really. And along with him came business people who wanted to bring globalization, capitalism. Along with him came Christian missionaries. Along with him came Orientalists who wanted to study about Egypt and Egyptians. And they wrote books during that time, like, what's an Egyptian? Here's my book, and you can know what an Egyptian's like. Yeah. And they were kind of rudimentary types of Orientalism, but it was Orientalism. And from that point on, as the world became more capitalistic and globalized, more and more European traders were coming into the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans quickly realized we need to update our law code, make like a law code that's uniform, that we can translate into European languages so they know how to do business over here and not break our laws. And they started getting curious about the West, because the West all of a sudden was getting this new kind of technology from, factories and automation and things that were going on during that time. And they started sending a lot of people over there to study and learn. So you had like graduates from Azhar who were being sent over to France to learn about their culture, their language, and study at their universities and things like that. And it even became a tradition where a lot of Azhari graduates go and do a PhD in the West. And that's still a tradition today. And this scholars were sent over from Syria. They were sent from, what's now Turkey, Anatolia, and these different things. And they brought back with them Western ideas. And then actual places became colonized, became actually ruled over, by the West, either directly or indirectly. Their suzerainty or, whatever, like Palestine was invaded by the British. Somalia had been invaded by British, Italians, and Portuguese, and all these different things going on. We know what happened in the subcontinent with Britain and all of these things around the Muslim world, right? France took a lot of Africa, things like that. Even the Spanish were in the Saharan desert, and we became highly influenced by their way of thinking because we are also getting educated by their institutions. And a lot of these Western ideas began to seep into the Islamic world and change the way that Muslims started theorizing or thinking about their own religion. So that's where you get like Muhammad Abdu, who tries to say the jinn are not really spirits, but they're germs. They're like disease, like bacteria. Okay. And the contemporary iteration of this is Zakir Naik, who wants to get on TV and explain to us scientific miracles in the Quran. One of the things I saw in graduate school that really made me question that approach was old scientific tafsirs of the Quran from like the 1800s. And they'd talk about, oh, this is the miracle right here in the Quran. The Quran proves it. The earth is flat.
The earth is flat.
Yeah, things that are completely unscientific nowadays. Mm-hmm. And they're using this approach on the Quran, and they're taking a materialistic worldview from the Western Enlightenment and trying to look at Islam through that worldview. And they're becoming detached from their own tradition. And what happened at the same time is the Orientalists came in and scooped up all the pre-modern manuscripts and brought them to Europe and put them in European libraries. And it wasn't until some Muslims who were educated in the West, like they kind of got a clue as to what's going on, and they would go travel to France, to Germany, photograph manuscripts, bring these photographs back to Egypt or wherever, and start editing them and republishing them. And that's where we get Sahih Bukhari as a published book. Where before it was only in manuscript form as Fath al-Bari. And that's kind of transferred over. Muslims who've come to the West, like Europe and America, not only do they have these ideas from the colonization period that have come through the West, but then we're steeped in Protestant culture here in the United States. And so you get this like prosperity gospel outlook that Muslims even have. Like, oh, if I'm rich and successful, that means God loves me or God favors me, or I'm now a leader in the community, or, whatever it may be. You get these kind of ideas that seep in, and it becomes a very materialist outlook on religion. And in the classical time, they would call these people ulama al-zahir, the scholars who are only know the exoteric or the external things about religion, and they don't know, ilm al-batin, the inward kind of parts of religion. Because when we pray salah, it's not just about doing some movements and I can do my movements better than you.
You feel like we've actually bought into, that's the first time I'm hearing this. I'm thinking it's the process that we've taken some of the Protestant method out, like some like prosperity gospel as one. What examples could you cite? Some examples of where you've seen that? Because I'm trying to connect the dots here. As far as like where you, because we've always said if we have wealth, it could be a test. We give gratitude towards it, but then it also is a test for us as well.
I mean, that would be more the indigenous perspective, but some people don't have that. Some people don't know that. You know, some people I've seen, like Muslim men and women, when they're trying to get married, they're like, their main concern is money. And they're like, oh, I need to get this huge dowry. I ain't going to accept no man makes less than 100K. And, you know, these types of attitudes. And these are people who are going to an Islamic university.
Hmm. I wonder if it's almost like this idea of, you've got these Muslim productivity self-help guru kind of things where like we're gonna give you coaching and you should dream big, have all this, like, whether it's to have, it's a lot of it can be centered around like having millions of dollars, right? Or have been wealthy or financially independence, right? Um and one of the brothers, Martin, from the Netherlands, he hit me up. I was like, so where is the qadr of a risk involved here? Like, how come that's
Right.
never like mentioned?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. So Martin, you finally sunk in. I had to like, I was kind of blowing him off. Like, you're a Dutch dude, man. You don't know what's going on in America. And he would always message me. He's like, man, you're talking about, because a lot of it is about, there's so much about like within like right wing thought, right? The idea of meritocracy. You know what I'm
That's a
saying?
very Protestant idea.
Yeah,
That's what Calvinism is based off of.
the free enterprise system. America is this land of opportunity, therefore, we all. But then we're like, wait a second, but as Muslims, we know that there is like that our risk is predetermined. So now, not, but at the same time, you don't know what your risk is, so you're supposed to work hard, right?
The thing is, with Protestantism in particular,
Okay.
you know, there's a very famous book. So I told you the father of like linguistics in the West is Ferdinand Saussure. The father of sociology in the West is Max Weber.
Okay.
And the big study that he did that kind of started this field we now know as sociology was, it's called Capitalism and the Protestant Ethic.
Okay.
And he traces how Calvinism and Lutheranism and the different sects within Protestantism were all about work, productivity, and making money. And working was ibadah, and much more than how Muslims mean it. Like, they're very serious. Like, you work yourself to the bone and you sacrifice yourself like Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross. That's like their mentality. And the more money you have, that is the more that God favors you. The prosperity gospel kind of idea. All of these kind of ethics that the early Protestants had, that along with kind of secular discourse, transformed and made the institutions and culture that capitalism emerged out of, where it's a very materialistic outlook, you know, that's clothed as religion. So you still, even now today, you have people like Joel Osteen, these, you know, TV preachers who are ultra wealthy and say that their wealth is a favor of God upon them. And people, they see them as wealthy, and so they know, oh, God favors them, and so they're drawn to them. And we
Interesting.
have the same kind of culture going on with like famous YouTube personalities, like Muslim Sheikh personalities on YouTube. And we're doing the same thing unconsciously, and we're not aware of it.
There was a I used to have an employee that used to work for me. He was like Christian by name, nominally Christian. Definitely wouldn't be considered a believer by most Christians, but and I remember I was talking to him about like, um, but he's like, one thing he always would mention is like, he's like, this pastor, I can just see how blessed he is, meaning like how materially, and I was like, there's got to be something there, because there's equation of, and he's talking about going to like a black church, right? The pastor, the preacher at the black, at a black church, like somewhere in like Northwest Indiana or something, so it's just yeah, man, like I don't know, in the circles I'm in, you don't see it, but I could see from a very lay person point of view how you could be enthralled by a Muslim preacher, imam who is wealthy, right?
Mhm.
um because generally most of our imams are broke, right? If you like be real
Mhm.
with, like, they're really like paycheck to paycheck, because just we don't have institutions set up. Um, but there is this, like, and then you hear, and when you take these courses, I've taken some of these courses, like these like productivity, like Muslim wealth, that kind of mindset course. And they're always talking
Mhm.
about Uthman ibn Affan, and if you had the wealth, you could donate, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like cause there, but it's like it's like a fine line, probably. It's like a delicate fine line.
In my personal experience, and
Yeah.
you can't know what everyone does behind the scenes, but
Right.
the Muslims that I've seen with wealth,
Yeah.
they donate it and try to do some good things here and there, but it's nowhere near the percentage of wealth donation that the Sahaba did.
Right.
And so, the thing about the Muslim world that I don't like, if the Muslim world, the medieval Muslim economy, was transported to now, the here and now, people would all call it socialist, because over 65% of the land was awqaf. They were these endowments, like nonprofits, that the wealthy had donated to the populace. So you might have one waqfir where all it does, its whole purpose, there's a caretaker of this land. He grows fruit trees just so that the poor can go and pick fruit and have food to eat. There's another waqf over here that all the crops that are grown on this land, the profits are donated to the madrasa to feed the students, to pay the teacher's salary, and keep the building, maintained, and those things. That is how the economy functioned in the medieval Muslim world for the most part. And the concept of private property was not really a thing. That's from modern capitalism. What they had back then is they had some farmers or like noble people in the community who own large swaths of land. They would pay what's called aqta taxes to the government. Everyone, of course, is going to be paying zakat, and all of that stuff was kind of how the economy was geared. And then each market had its own muhtasab, or like enforcer, who would make sure no one's gouging prices, no one's tricking people and trying to sell them a goat that has no milk, or whatever, and they puff up the udder but there's no milk, those types of things. And I feel like it's so different than the world we live in now. It's like we can't even imagine it.
There's a question that came up in the chat. Nonprofits are not state owned, however, right? So doesn't that separate it from socialism, as most socialists would prescribe it?
Well, like I'm saying with these words, you always have to ask people, like, what do you mean by that? Socialism, I think here in America, we have this idea that socialism is like communism, or that it's heavily authoritarian, like what the Soviets did and what China did and these different things. But there's a whole line of thought in socialism that's anti-government. And it's just kind of the people as communities coming together to pool resources. And that's where this commune culture of the hippies came out of. But there's more to it than just that. That's why I say it'd be called socialist today, because it reminds people of this, it's kind of like socialist communes of the old days, or like the old, because in America, we have actually a long tradition of socialist thought that's tied with anarchism. And by anarchism, they meant libertarianism, not just chaos. But where you're against heavy regulation, you're against these big businesses and wealth, and income inequality and these things. And so, like Rockefeller, who donated to University of Chicago a lot, these types of people would protest his factories heavily, and organize and make unions and things like that. And that's kind of the strain of thought that I'm more talking about.
There's I want to scroll back up. There's a sister that had a question here about where do you start as far as so she was like, I was asking like, where do you start? And she responded, decolonization is a start. Like, I guess so I kind of hear what she's saying. But with that being said, if we're talking about colonization, like colonizing, like, how we go, because you talked about how when Napoleon invaded Egypt, and then the Ottomans would send people to non-Muslim lands to get educated. That's kind of brought in like outside influences, right?
Yeah, it was like an intellectual colonization, if you will.
In a way, okay. But could you say like that the Ottomans themselves were colonizers in some sense? If you want to be like, if you want to remove like religion, like let's say we step back and look at it like a critique, someone who might say you know, is that something that is a fair statement?
Then again, here it all depends on what you mean by colonization. Okay, because I had a discussion with somebody who tried to argue that the early Arabs and the early Islamic conquests were colonizers, and all that they did was colonize the Middle East. And I said, hold up, wait a minute here. Because when you look at what the Arabs did, first of all, the Arabs have existed from Haran, Turkey, all the way down to Yemen. That whole swath of land is what's called Arabia.
Okay.
It's a huge area. And Arabs were reported in 3000 BCE by the Persians and Egyptians, and all these different civilizations talked about the Arabs. They all knew them. They're not new to the Middle East. So when they came out and conquered, all these places up to Anatolia, started taking parts of what we now call Iran, they had already been living there. They're an indigenous population who rose up, in a sense, first of all. So that's quite a bit different right there. Okay, they were one amongst many ethnicities. They were like a minority, you might say, in the Middle East in that regard. And then they didn't settle with the populations. They built what are called amsar, or like kind of like fortresses or barracks, or their own cities, maybe next to a city. And they were a small minority who ruled over a majority non-Muslim population. And that's a lot different than colonialism from the West. Colonialism from the West brought with it completely different epistemologies that were destructful or destroying to what the populace was doing. They just show up and say, you're wrong, ignore them completely, and this is how we're going to do it. Whereas the Arabs, when they moved in to like Iraq or Sham or, Egypt, Mosul, they engaged with these populations, and they left the people in charge who had always been in charge. They became the tax collectors, and they would have discussions. Like, oh, I see you're reading this Greek text here. It's this Plato guy. Who's that? Who's Aristotle? And they'd be like, oh, well, let's translate it into Arabic, and they would have a lot of back and forth discourse. And the Middle East remained majority non-Muslim until after the Crusades. It was the Crusades that started to make people convert en masse.
Okay. So that's a good example. I was going to ask you, like, so you kind of like define what you term as colonization. So like when you look at British, like, as, I don't know if you're familiar with like British India, how does that look? My only vision of British India is when I watched like Jungle Book, like the real life Jungle Book. Cause it was like Mowgli falls in love with like some white lady in like the modern Disney version, real life actors.
The thing about it is, when you look like at the order of things from Michel Foucault or any book kind of like on the history, intellectual history of the West, you realize that not capitalism, but colonialism is tied up with every other Western domain of knowledge. It's tied into capitalism. It's tied into Orientalism. It's tied into Protestantism, and all of these things come together as a package. So when they would come to the Indian subcontinent, or when they would come to an African society, they brought with them missionaries, they brought with them Orientalists, they brought all of these types of things, and they ruled administratively within the population in a very severe way. And they brought with them factories and taking goods from countries, bringing it to be changed and mass produced in Britain and different things like that. And it was completely exploitative in nature.
I got you. So today with like, I guess I want to like, as we kind of wrap up here, we're only going over 2 hours, but I know you said you got no limit, but I'm sure your kids are screaming at some point.
I got stuff to do, but I think it's an important discussion.
Yeah, but I think like as we get into like we illustrated some of the how we attack certain things. So I'll tell you what goes through my mind, right? Sometimes it's we have confirmation biases. So for example, we as friends, people who like we associate with people, we tend to like create our own like echo chambers, right? Friends
Yeah,
tend to
social
tend,
media makes it worse too.
yeah, but even like real life friends tend to think similarly. We when we go to work, obviously where we work is we are like I work in corporate America, right? Which is like obviously capitalism in its finest form, so to speak, or whatever, pure, and it's and it creates this own mentality within the employee, like the employee. The company can let you go whenever you're at will. They give
Right.
you benefits, but then you like it there's this whole thing about corporate culture and how you're gonna be a company man and like all this stuff, and they're like, hey, you're so we want people who are passionate, and you're like thinking about like, and where I work, like you can see where there's a higher purpose because of the industry we're in, but like some people working in like you're working. I have a buddy of mine with undergrad with he became a vice president at a freaking drum company, like not musical drums, but like those industrial drums. You know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about? I was
Yeah.
like, that gotta be the most boring thing. How do you get excited about that, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? So and it's like you catch yourself telling yourself certain things that, oh, this is exciting. No, it's not. It's super boring. You're just getting paid for it. And it's a livelihood. And then it creates this, and then so but long story short, that's how you kind of develop, and everyone who's working there is thinking the same way. If you're thinking outside the box, or you're like you got a side project going on that you're passionate about, like a podcast or something, that would make you an outlier. Okay, but in general, you're thinking a certain way. So what happens is this. So I hear about this guy who's his name, you Chicago guy, Thomas Sowell. Okay, he's like an economist or something.
Okay.
Yeah. So have you heard? Are you familiar with him?
I'm not.
Okay, so he is. People label him as like a black conservative, right? I don't know what his but I think one thing we have learned in this conversation is that let's avoid labels, okay? Unless we can define them, we should like lay out this guy believes in this, right? So I would see people that like maybe Mashaik that I respect tweeting him or whatnot, and so like, okay, and I see that he's got a documentary about himself. There's a documentary that someone did about him on Amazon Prime, so I check it out. He looks interesting. It looks like he's well read. He's done a lot of work. He's like in his 90s now. And so I'm like, okay, let me hear him out. Right. Now, granted, this guy's still alive. So would it be appropriate for me to like study his works? And then but having my Islamic backdrop and like trying to use that as like criterion and say like, do I agree with this guy on here, but I disagree with here? Or again, should I go back to root cause, going back, find out who he's influenced by, and then go back to them?
I think you need to do both.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, like, for instance, I was talking to Yusuf Rios, Sheikh Yusuf Rios,
Sure.
before about this. We're talking about Arab store owners who go into Black communities, and and how sometimes in the Muslim community, a business owner or someone successful in business is kind of propped up as almost a religious leader sometimes. And I said, well, the whole concept of business is from the modern West. It came from when the Western colonizers went to China and were trying to trade with the Chinese, and this word BG became like business in English. And it's a concept that you don't see in any classical Islamic text. They talk about tijara, about trade. They're talking about mercantilism. They're talking about, different ways of economic exchange than what we would call business. Today, business is like an institution, right? And from that comes the corporation. It's just kind of different modes of thinking, and we have to be aware of that, like historical genealogy of ideas. But at the same time, we can use our Islamic criterion, our epistemology, and go and read these types of theories and understand the laws about business or whatever, and still benefit and still learn from it. There might be things that we need from that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You take the good and leave the bad.
Sure. There's a comment came in. The Arab. So I actually heard this. So I used to have a coworker. He's a Syrian Christian. So his family,
Mm-hmm.
like, obviously, under the Ottoman rule. And I was like, what did you think of the Ottoman? Was like, would you? He's like, no, we don't want a theocracy. I'd rather have a secular democracy. And the comment here is like, Arab Christians call Muslims colonizers all the time. Same with Hindus in the Mughals, I think it was. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, from their point of view, how was Islam not destructive to the kufr of the people there, epistemology wise?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people just they want to throw around these plastic buzzwords as a rhetorical thing to make you feel bad or feel guilty. But then, like, if you go into the Western Academy and try to argue these were colonizations, you'd be laughed out.
Mm-hmm.
Because they'd say, no, colonization has all these contingencies. It's just a product of, Western history. What you're talking about, we have to call something else. Or you're making the definition of colonization so broad that it's like not really useful.
Would you say that but going back to the kind of the larger framework we're trying to implement here, is it even like appropriate? Like, how do we balance the idea of, because even the idea of colonization, it's a Western term, right?
Right.
And so, aren't we still using the Western lens to look at this? Is there a better way? Is there because it seems like what what we're arguing for here, which makes a lot of sense, is that we've got to like change the game. You change the entire paradigm, and that almost means like we start using our own terminology. So
Yeah.
would you advocate for like what a different type of terminology instead of colonization that we can use comes from where we can use the Islamic point of view?
So there's people who they've wrote books on like what's called Islamic English. We need
Okay.
to use a type of Islamic English that's based on indigenous Islamic terminology. Like, for
Yeah.
instance, it's like so vogue nowadays to say like I'm a revert, but in Arabic, you translate revert to Arabic, it could mean ridda, apostasy.
Mm.
And what we would see in the classical texts is they would say, aslamt, like she became Muslim, she submitted. Or you would see like dakhal Islam, like he entered Islam.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different, it's really shapes your thinking. Like Jacques Lacan, the psychoanalyst I mentioned before, he says, language shapes how your subconscious works. And if you don't have the language or these ideas, then you're going to think in a really different way without knowing it even. Mm-hmm. It's going to affect your behavior in ways you don't even understand yourself.
Right.
And a lot of that just goes back to trying to read and connect with the tradition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's almost like as I'm like hearing from you, it's almost like we need to, in our discourse, try to avoid these terms, because especially in conversation with lay people, because it's going to set people off. And I'm seeing some of the comments coming through, and it's like people like either they jumped some of the brothers, as I'm looking, they must have missed the earlier part where these words like socialism or colonialism, these are very like, they can mean many different things, right? They're not, it's not a monolith,
they're
right?
Plastic words.
Yeah, it's a monolith. We have to like pick apart and exactly like what are you talking about here exactly, right?
To some extent, these terms are necessary to use, but then you always got to explain what you mean by it.
Right.
To avoid them altogether, you might not have clear communication.
Sure. I got another question. What is Hamza's view of Slavoj Zizek? I'm butcher. I'm sorry. I don't know these names. I'm butchering them.
Slavoj Zizek.
Yeah. Wait, who's that?
So he's a really prominent leftist philosopher based out of Ljubljana, Slovenia.
Okay.
And he's called the Elvis of theory. He's like really big in academia, but he's kind of like an old staunch kind of communist.
Okay.
But he brings in a lot of thought from French structuralism as well, like from Jacques Lacan. He did a PhD in philosophy and then a second PhD in psychoanalysis. And he tries to critique capitalism and other types of, like, I guess you'd say, ideologies. And see, this is where the propaganda of capitalism is in our lives. This is where the propaganda of this ideology is in our life from a philosophical point of view. And then he'll talk about it from a psychological point of view, how it affects us in ways we might not even be aware of. And, from an Islamic perspective, I look at some of the stuff like, okay, yeah, there's definitely, I could see how this capitalist propaganda might, be affecting us in ways we don't realize, but I can't agree with him on everything. He's kind of more of the old school, like authoritarian, Stalinist type communist. I ain't down with that,
Right. Okay. Sure. And as we wrap up here, obviously you had alluded to earlier, you used to live like you're talking about Cub Foods. What happened in a year ago in Minneapolis with George Floyd? Obviously, with a trial going on right now.
Mhm.
Um, you know, there's this whole talk about like there was a clubhouse room that I was a part of. I did not start the room. Are you? I know I saw you're on Clubhouse, but I haven't seen you active on there.
I haven't been able to figure out how it really works yet.
To be honest,
Yeah,
if we could moderate it, this kind of conversation would be really useful on Clubhouse. It's a voice only app. I think you'd enjoy it, but maybe after Ramadan we can like figure something out.
sure.
But I think there's a but it's got to be moderated well, otherwise it can get like hella toxic real fast,
Yeah,
right?
social media, in my opinion, is just not a good place to like share knowledge because it gets toxic so quick, so easy.
Right, right. So I mean, I think that when there was a room the other day that was called should white people be allowed to convert to Islam? Okay. I remember I was at the gym and like I got some WhatsApp messages and screenshot like look at this clickbait title here, right?
Yeah.
The brothers who started the a group the room is from Chicago. You may know him. Um and so I jumped in and then he made me a mod. Although I said like I spoke for like 10 seconds. I was doing other things. I screenshotted it, put it in my IG story. Long story
Uh-huh.
short is it got shared like crazy. The fact that because like Clubhouse disappears, it's not recorded, right? The next
Yeah.
day, my
I'm sorry.
phone,
Somebody, there's my kid over there, opened the
no,
door and almost knocked the light over.
no, my it's like my kids were banging earlier on the door. I got it locked, but I think it was just like the club. This room was so I shared it, and the next day, like my phone is like blowing up. Like, how could you support this room? What kind of question is this? And I'm like, listen, I didn't start the room. Like, there's Mashaik in there. Look at the screenshot. There's other like, there's people of knowledge in this room that are like discussing it. It started the conversation because, um, you know, there was a lot of like South Asian and like Arabs in the room who were saying like, yes, white people should, um, obviously like Islam is for everybody. We're talking about salvation. We want salvation for
Right.
humanity, right? It's not exclusive to any ethnic group. Every ethnic group has cultural baggage of some type, right? We shouldn't
True.
let that be a hindrance. We go with it, right? And I think the brother who was started the room was arguing from the point of view of like, and he's a white brother, he's a white convert, and he was kind of like, but there's this white savior complex and X, Y, and Z. And I think he's
It's
talking
true.
about like a lot of, but again, is like the question is like, yeah, there is in some, you see some in some places, but some places it's um, like I remember it's like some
Allah
people,
forgive me if I ever had that attitude.
yeah, but there was like, I don't know if you remember, like whatever happened to Imam Nick. You remember Imam Nick? You ever heard of him?
Nick, I was.
Imam Nick Pelletier. He was an
Mhm.
imam down in Irving, Texas. Okay, and this is like not opposite of white savior. Like he was an imam. He's a
Mhm.
graduate of Islamic University of Medina. He was an imam down there, and there was some case of like some kind of like child molestation by some elder in the masjid, right? And he called it out on the Jummah on the mimbar, right? Because they were the board was trying to cover it up or something, right? And they were trying to handle it was one of those things where it was an uncle who was related to one of the board members and he was visiting and he did something funky with some kid in the
Mhm.
masjid. And they just sent him back to like Pakistan or something. They just flew him out before anything could happen. And it was kind of like, yeah, we're trying to like brush it under the rug. So he gave a Juma khutbah about it, and he went off, right? And then like 2 days later, he's put on administrative leave, kind of thing. He was like, and I don't know if he works there anymore. Um, so
I
I
think he
guess
probably knew that going into it.
maybe who knows, but like you see it, but at the same time, you see like I remember when I first got interested in practicing Islam, the guy that I was infatuated with was Jeffrey Lang. I don't know if you remember Jeffrey Lang. He's a math professor at Kansas. He wrote the book Even the Angels Ask. Right, he was a former atheist. He converted to Islam, or like
I
Yusuf
think
Estes.
I
Yeah,
heard about him. Yeah.
yeah. So you would see this like white dude that could be your like math professor, right, in a blaze like college professor, and he's Muslim, and he's talking about it, and you're like, that's interesting. So I see that, I can get it, right, but I think the point of the thing is, but what I was really trying to get into it is that like there seems to be that there's got to be like there's this whole issue of like when what came later in the conversation in the room. There's some other stuff that went down the drain, but there was some conversation about like, well, when white people convert to Islam, then they need to also take a primer on white supremacy.
For sure.
Why would you say that? But do you think that's almost like adding something to the shahada?
Well, here in Minnesota,
Okay.
the community is overwhelmingly Somali, like 90% plus Somali.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
If there's a white convert comes in, he's never been around black people before, more than likely he's going to hurt people unintentionally.
Okay.
And I do think it's important that some brothers could sit him down and try to explain things and give him like a crash course on what it means to be white in America, how that's what the Somali or black experience is, or Desi experience, or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And try to slowly, and be, of course, real patient with this person, because part of becoming woke, or whatever you want to say, call it, is that you're going to fumble, you're going to make mistakes, you're not going to be perfect. And as a white person, we have to always be receptive to be corrected, to have people tell us what you did hurt my feelings, and say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that again, and I'm not here, my intention is never to hurt or oppress nobody.
But that seems like just being culturally competent in any
Right.
space, right?
Right.
But I think that would go across the board. So I remember like it could be anyone converting from another background, and then coming to another, you convert to Islam. Let's say you're an African American and you convert in a primarily like Bosnian community, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be going to a Bosnian. So to me, that just seems like culture. Like, I don't see how that's like a thing of, because what's happening is that like, a lot of the brothers of European descent, this is the gripe I'm hearing, is that they feel like, that we have swallowed this like, some of the CRT language, the critical race theory stuff, which I believe is a tool. Personally, I think there's a lot to be learned from it. I think if we like, we just need to know how to use it. But when like but to them it seems like that they're being blamed, like it's almost like a form of like original sin. We talked about Protestantism and how we've infused ourselves with that, like this kind of like trying to, how we approach white converts in this way seems to almost be some kind of semblance of like original sin. That's just my take.
I can't blame Black America or even Brown America for being suspicious of white people in that manner, because history has shown over and over again that white people have exploited Black people, people of color, indigenous people. So that type of suspicion to me is understandable, and I don't think it's like based in like this type of su'avan, or the opposite of husnul in Islamic like ethics, because there is like a tangible, real thing that happened that white people have done to other races. You know what I mean? That is a logical base of like, whoa, this person really good intentioned, or is this person out to hurt me? I think that's, but at the same time, we want to maintain ukhuwa, brotherhood. We do want to have husnul dhan. So you got to kind of strike a balance with that type of thing. That's like my white perspective on it.
It's almost
Maybe
like,
I'm wrong, and I'm
yeah,
open to being corrected.
because the thing, I'm Bangladeshi, right? Okay, so Bangladesh recently, as I think last week, was 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence from, at the time, West Pakistan, right? And the Liberation War in the 1971 was pretty brutal. A lot of rape, a lot of bloodshed.
Mm.
You know, so many Bangladeshis still have like, so this is something very, I mean, like my uncle was a freedom fighter. There's this type of like, it's not, it's, I'm only one generation removed. I was born 10 years after the Liberation War, like, right?
Right.
Obviously my parents grew up as essentially as citizens of Pakistan, to be honest.
Mm.
And they saw what happened, but like, it almost, the problem, but when the way they raised me wasn't like, granted, there's always like this slant. Like my cousin would tell me stuff like when I was getting married, when I was single, and I was like looking for, I was like, I want to marry Pakistani girls are cuter than Bengali girls. So I told her, and she's like, no, you can't do that because we won't eat rice. They don't eat rice. They only eat like naan or something, right? Like they kind of some kind of thing like that. Like,
Okay.
what am I gonna do when I come visit you? What are we gonna eat? To this day, she's actually, I don't think she's visited my house once since I've been married. She came to my wedding, but like they live in Canada. It's like it's easier said than done. We're not neighbors or nothing. There's no beef, just the FYI. But it seems to me like, yeah, I can understand there's like groups of people did this, but then every human being is accountable for themselves.
Yeah.
Like to me, that's, and I think that we get that from Islam. We don't shoulder the blame. Everyone is responsible for themselves. Like Ikramah ibn Abi Jahl, at the end of the day, like it's almost like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would tell the other companions to be sensitive towards him because he knew that his dad was a freaking dickhead, right? You know what I'm saying? Versus the opposite of like, oh, you were, and he actually fought against the Prophet and the companions. So to me, it's like, this to me crosses over into like I'd be curious, how have in your your time with Sheikh Samir and Sheikh Walid, have they is this something that you could discuss with, that you've discussed with them in the past? Because I think this is something where I tend to side with the brothers of the European backgrounds who are offended, because, and some are not offended, but some on the opposite end have almost like this kind of like white guilt to like a very like scenario. So for example, in this clubhouse room that happened the other night, there was an exchange where a white scholar, like a bona fide scholar, was cussed out on the stage by not a black sister, but like a black non-binary person. Okay. And I asked the brother who moderated the room the next day, it's like, how come you didn't boot her or silence her or mute her when she was cussing out this scholar? And he was like, I didn't want to, because that would be me as a white man using my power, and I didn't want that perception. But I'm like, dude, like he didn't do anything. Like to me, I was like listening in the room at the time. I wasn't a mod, otherwise I would have bumped her down to the audience right then. But to me, I was like, doesn't, like, that's an effect of like you're basically allowing. And I was talking to Sheikh Dawood Walid about this, from I don't know if you're familiar with him. So he's we had multiple conversations this week after this clubhouse room, and he was like, yo, this is like clear cut unacceptable. We do not talk to our mashayikh that way, period. Like, you know what I'm saying? And
while I agree with that,
yeah,
if you look at like these pre-modern texts, the early Islamic texts about when they had public debates and things like that, some random idiot from the street would come up and say something, horrible or whatever it is. But the ulama always maintained the best of adab and cool heads.
What?
And they allowed these people to voice their opinions, and they would respond logically. They wouldn't get into long debates with, you see in a classical text a lot, like, don't debate the ahmaq, the idiot.
Yeah, right.
But like, we're supposed to engage with these people. And I think silencing them is just going to push them further away from Islam. I think you have to let them express their grievances and then address them.
There, yeah, the sheikh to himself, to his credit, he maintained his composure. He didn't like, he
At the
eventually
end
had
of
to
the
go.
day,
Yeah,
like you said, it's about salvation.
right. You know, so I think that's what. But yeah, that's but how's life been like? Do you think that have you been following the trial? Like how's it looking right now?
I've been watching it very closely.
Okay.
I was very active, in the protests. I get goosebumps just thinking about it all because I used to shop at Cup Foods. I used to
Mm-hmm.
pray Juma at Cup Foods. I used to get gas at that gas station.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff's all been very personal for me. My aunt's a Minneapolis police officer,
Mm-hmm.
like 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And to see a man brutally murdered in the street like that by the police was just horrifying, in a place where I've stood before, a place where I've parked my car before. It was, the whole thing's been traumatic and brutal. And, the protests were real. You could see the videos I have on my channel, Hamza the Historian. Me and Yusuf Rios are having a conversation about it right now. Like, I think a lot of us protesters got PTSD from it all.
Mm-hmm.
I had a SUV of white supremacists almost run me over, and I probably could have died. We were at war with the police and the military. The Muslims here saw it as like a struggle, a jihad in a sense. You had Hufad wearing qamis, like thobe,
Mm-hmm.
throwing tear gas canisters back at the police.
Mm-hmm.
The shuyukh telling people to go out and protest.
Mm-hmm.
And now with the trial, it's like all of that's coming back to the surface, all those emotions, all those feelings, all those traumatic memories. And all the facts that are coming out match what the rumor on the street has always been, that the FBI was surveilling Cup Foods before George Floyd, that they were trying to come down real hard on Cup Foods because of counterfeit bills, because there's a street gang that operates in the alleyway behind a Cup Foods down the block a little bit. A lot of people think they were pushing the counterfeit bills, and it was being heavily policed for that reason. And you had these evil cops who killed an innocent man, all because of this hyper policization of this little pocket, this little area.
Can you
And
share what how like your aunt being a police officer in the city? How's like what like her response, like any kind of dialogue? If you don't have to, if you don't want to, but
to be honest, I haven't had time to sit down and talk with her about any of this stuff.
mm-hmm.
I really would love to, but we're not that close, never really have been. It's a long, long story as to why. It's more to do with her relationship with my dad, I think. But, it's very painful for me to know that I have a family member on the police, and I don't know what her opinion is on all this. And I fear that she may have a very, different opinion than mine. And if that's the case, I don't know how much of a relationship we could ever have. And that's just the reality, that we have to deal with. That's, me and Yusuf Rios in our conversations, we talk about, it's different when you're like a convert or an indigenous Muslim, when you're generations in and you grow up in this society, because these are your relatives who are part of the system. And you have a stake in actually changing society and changing the culture, bringing Islamic ethics to the populace, bringing tajdeed to the culture, and all these types of things. And I think George Floyd was a moment where the Muslims in Minnesota, because that was a halal store and a mosque, we all were ready to go, and change things and change society, change policing, change health. Because, like I said, majority of Muslims are Black in Minnesota. Like, we're heavily policed in Minnesota. We're heavily harassed by the FBI, the regular cops, all of it. And we want change. And the trial just brings, like I said, all these emotions back up. But we know now, all these facts coming out with the trial, that the government had cameras all over the area, and they were surveilling it, that they were surveilling the mosque there, because it's like the next day after it happened, all the FBI had interviewed all the people involved. Like they were watching it as it was happening on the cameras. And the 911 dispatchers could watch on the cameras too, what was going on as it was happening. And she called the supervisor, police supervisor, and said, these police are like overstepping their bounds. Don't call me a snitch, but like something's going on here you need to look into. And
So
go ahead.
yeah, so with all that being said, do you think, or how confident are you that he's going to be convicted?
Well, even when Trump was president, Derek Chauvin's attorney was trying to do a plea deal with the government where he could just serve 10 years in federal prison. He knows he's going to prison. That was the plea deal, okay?
Right.
The thing is that the state of Minnesota has a very strong case on him. I think a lot of people are very certain he's going to go down. And if he doesn't, we're ready to, whether it's right or wrong, and I'm not saying it's right and I'm not condoning it, but Minnesotans are ready to burn the buildings all back down again. You know? But I do think he will be convicted, and maybe I'm naive in that. But not only does the state of Minnesota have a case against him, but the feds have a case against him, civil rights case pending against him. So he could not only get convicted from the Minnesota trial, he could also be convicted again from the federal trial. That could happen. So, I mean, and the Minneapolis Police Department it seems like they're really trying to say this is not how police should act themselves. They're trying to separate from him. They're testifying against him in significant ways. The police chief is yet to testify. They have all kinds of medical experts that are yet to testify. So, I mean, it's going to be a long trial yet ahead. Maybe another 2 weeks at least.
Cool. All right. Well, Hamza, I want to let's go ahead and wrap this up. We're almost close to 3 hours. How can people find out more about you? Where can they find you? And like, where can they support what you're doing?
So I have the YouTube channel, Hamza the Historian. Like I have my name here. And also Hamza the Linguist is a YouTube channel I have where I talk about learning languages. And I have a Patreon account, if anybody wants to be my patron.
And what's the Patreon link? Patreon.com/.
Hamza the Historian is like one word.
Hamza the Historian. Okay, cool.
Also, I'm on Twitter. I got Facebook pages, all that. Hamza Dudgeon is my name if you want to look me up.
Sure. Well, hey, it was a pleasure. This is probably one of the longer interviews I've ever done. Usually don't go this far, but I feel like
I talk too much.
No, but I feel like we have to. So I've got to do some homework. I got to get educated on some stuff, and hopefully we could do another conversation at some point. And we definitely, like I said, hope to get you on Mad Mamluks. Inshallah, when you come through to Chicago. For the listeners out there or those watching, you can hit me up at info@sultansandstinkers.com. Wasn't planning on live streaming this on Facebook, but just did it as a kind of like a backup just in case. I have this paranoia that Zoom won't render or the right way, but this is had a few people jump on with no heads up, contribute to discussion. Appreciate you guys asking. Appreciate brother Samuel Master for engaging throughout the whole conversation. And trying to and I try to cover some of those questions that he bounced in there. So yeah. And then follow Sultans and Sneakers at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And then if you want to be a patron of this show, patreon.com/Sultans and Sneakers. For my special guest, Hamza the Historian, I'm your host, Mahin the Podcaster, signing off.